Hi, this is Sadie Miller, and you're listening to The Sirens of Audio.
I think there was a 3-year gap between the first series and this one, which is the second series. The reason being, I desperately have to be wanted, you see. So I let the first sort of rush subside, if you can call it rush, and oh gosh, doing a Sarah Jane tape, what will it be like? I love the comments that I had back from people who'd bought it, and I wanted to see if down the line, even years later, people would still remember and want to hear more, because it is a dicey thing when you put an assistant on her own without the doctor, kind of will it work? We did it in K9, and, as everyone sort of knows on the circuit, I'm not so happy with that. So it was just that still people were asked, are you going to do any more? So I thought I would love to do some more if Big Finish are interested. And Jason Haig-Ellery had said, when you're interested, let me know. And I did. And it's been an absolute joy doing this series too. We have collaborated on scripts with David Bishop. I have been allowed such an input on storyline, not because I'm good at it, but because I have in my head this character that I've kind of been living with for over 30 years.
G'day audiophiles, and welcome to this special edition of The Sirens of Audio. I'm Dwayne.
And I'm Philip. G'day Dwayne, g'day audiophiles.
G'day Philip, and this has been a long time coming because it's been well over 6 months since we did our feature on Sarah Jane Smith Series 1, and we're finally putting out our retrospective on Series 2. So I'm very excited about it.
It's a shorter gap than they had between the two series, though.
How long was that? 4 years?
Yeah, about 4 years between Series 1 and Series 2. So I think, we're still waiting for, Series 2 will never come. But we're waiting years and years for the next one, and that never happened either.
Yeah, I know. If we wanted to do a 20th anniversary, we'd have to wait another 3 years, wouldn't we?
We would.
This set? But we're not going to do that. We
No.
want to get this. We want to get this out there for you to enjoy. So we're going to be talking about Series 2. There's 4 stories in the series, and yeah, I just, rather than jump down a rabbit hole as we normally do in our podcast, I just want to ask you the question: what is it about the character of Sarah Jane Smith that is so enduring amongst most fans?
It's fascinating, isn't it? Because nearly any fan survey will put Sarah Jane Smith at the very top of the favourite companions list, certainly of our generation. And even, all new fans, once they start watching the show, put her there too. And even all the other companions recognise the fact, talking to Janet and Sophie, they all recognise, Sarah Jane Smith was the favourite. I don't know, partly, for me, it was partly against my age. I talk about the fact that Sarah Jane was the first woman I fell in love with, because you just feel safe around her and secure. I think Elizabeth's performance is so confident, and she brings so much out of the character in terms of humour, but also fear, but also excitement and adventure. She looks like she's having a great time, except for when she's not. But, on the whole, you can see why she wants... Because you look at what she goes through in some of the stories, it's absolutely horrific what Sarah Jane goes through. But the moments when she's just traveling with the doctor, there's excitement there and adventure, and it's all in the actress. Because certainly back then, the writers weren't writing for the companions. They certainly weren't writing for the female companions. They were just given lines to say to let the doctor do what he had to do. But Elizabeth managed to get so much out of those lines and play them up. And I think because, particularly, she also got on well with John, because she was able to carry a lot of stuff with John as well. And, and John was in a grief process in his last season. He'd lost Katie Manning. He'd lost the unit family was dispersing. And yet he obviously took a shining to Elizabeth, which I would have thought he may have done because when you lose everything that you're so dear, often it's a bit harder. But certainly for John, he didn't show that. But when Tom came along, the rapport between Elizabeth and Tom is so clear, and their affection is so clear, and we know that they played up a bit in rehearsal rooms, and they added bits and they added movements in. There's a lovely scene in the pyramids of Mars where they both stroll in, see the mummies, turn around, walk back out again, do this abrupt turn. All that sort of stuff was worked out in rehearsal rooms. It wasn't in the script. And I think that's just why she's just so endearing. And she was there for so long. I mean, it was 3.5 years. She's probably, she's the longest serving companion. She may not have more episodes, but she's up there amongst the longest times, certainly in years. And it was the golden age in terms of great stories. So and can I say, just a lovely person. I won't tell my story again, but having met her, I was still in love with her. And I still miss her. And when I heard that she died, it was a real moment. I really remember it hitting me hard because I was just so sad because she was just amazing. And then when they brought her back for the Sarah Jane Adventures, I mean, once again, just lovely lady, brilliant actress, and loved her role. What about you? Why do you think she endures so well?
Well, I think you've vocalized it very well for everybody. I've as you were speaking, I was thinking about the difference in performance between her and the Third Doctor and her and the Fourth Doctor, because there is a little spark that's not quite there in season 11. However, that's the season I'm most familiar with. That's one of my favourite seasons. I just love all those stories. But it wasn't until she got with the Fourth Doctor that it kind of, well, you can't say it was better. It was just different and it changed. There was a little bit of a dynamic shift in those two actors performing together. And so therefore the character changed as well. And I was thinking that to compare that with the current series or the 21st century series, can we call it the new series now? It's been going for decades. When the companion, I mean, we had it with Rose. Rose went from the 9th to the 10th, but the chemistry was similar in both. It just sort of got deeper with the 10th, I guess. It didn't really change. The companion in the new series that did have a change was Clara. So she started off with the 11th Doctor with a certain dynamic, and there was a special arc actually in that series 7B, which I'm currently watching at the moment and really, really enjoying more than I did when it was first transmitted, to be honest.
Yes, I watched it recently too. You're right. I enjoyed it so much more recently.
Yep. And then there's that shift to the 12th Doctor, which is a totally different dynamic. There was something totally different between the character of the Doctor and Clara, between those two regenerations, just as there was with Sarah Jane and the 3rd and 4th Doctors. So that's my little comparison there. But I love them both. I think
that's partly an age thing. I think because John was so much older than Tom. So it's interesting because where the 3rd Doctor being so protective over Joe, and so they had this lovely protective relationship. Because Sarah's so much more independent, it wasn't quite the same relationship, but there was still a deep fondness. And once again, Elizabeth's lady could turn a couple of times when she thought the 3rd Doctor was dead. Twice, Monster Peladon and Planet Spiders. There's tears and there's so much emotion there. So you can see there's this deep care, but there was nothing because the age difference was there. It wasn't. You could see it wasn't romantic. I guess with Tom there was actually slightly different sort of friction. But it was, once again, it wasn't that sort of sexual friction at all because Tom's Doctor was so non-romantic, so alien. I mean, he could be very human and very warm, but there was times in which you just saw.
Usually, that was when he was angry. He was most human.
Yeah. You might be right there. But it's just once again, just an amazing performance. And I said she should have been a star. The fact that she didn't go on, because anything she acted in, she was just amazing and always acting. There's never a moment you can catch Elizabeth Staten, in the back scene where she's not being Sarah Jane. She's just carrying it off all the time.
So we're going to talk about Series 2 of Sarah Jane Smith, the Big Finish production. But a while back we spoke with Gary Russell and we're talking a lot about Series 1 because he was the producer for Series 1. but not for series 2. There was a bit of a transition going on with Gary Russell. So he was actually going to become the script editor for the Sarah Jane Smith Adventures on television. So all this was happening around the same time that series 2 was happening, and John Ainsworth was taking over as producer of this series. So we've got a little snippet from our chat with Gary that we didn't use before, where he's talking a little bit about the transition from Big Finish to Sarah Jane Smith, and we thought we'd share that with you just before we get into the Series 2 retrospective proper.
So you weren't tempted to bring another season after this of Sarah?
I thought I was quite happy that I'd done what I wanted to do, that it turned out, I'm not somebody who likes arcs, but having done it, I thought the Miss Winters thing worked. We'd left on a slight cliffhanger if there was another series. I never pitched to Jason doing a second series at all. I thought, and Liz never asked to do a second series with me, and there's quite a gap, I think. But I can't remember exactly. My series, how long?
4 years. 2000. Yours was 2002. The next one comes out 2006.
Yeah, I was going to say, because we made it in 2001. Did we? Yeah, well, we did. It was quite a long time. Or maybe we started in 2001 and ended 2002. Because it was quite a long time between recording it and it actually getting turned into shiny discs. And yeah, I think John must have recorded his Sarah Jane before she went to Cardiff to do School Reunion, but only just. And I'm feeling it came out after School Reunion.
I think the last one came out about 3 weeks before School Reunion.
Was transmitted.
Yes.
But yes, I think it was made before she recorded School Reunion. And then I remember talking to Liz. I knew she'd done it and everything. I have a feeling it was done after I left Big Finish, you see. I think it might have been being talked about. I don't know. I think John might have made it after I left Big Finish. I honestly can't remember whether I was there while it was being made or not. But I know I certainly didn't see anything of Liz until we did the read-through of the pilot for Sarah Jane Adventures, which I wasn't the script editor of. But Russell said to me, "Will you come to the read-through?" And I was like, "Oh, yeah, okay, sure." He said, "I just think Liz would be very happy if she saw a familiar face. This is a big thing for her. She's quite nervous. So if you were there, it might put her at ease." And I was thinking, well, it might not, because, we haven't seen each other for a few years. But anyway, I went along and she greeted me like her best friend in the history of the world. And that was lovely. So that when I eventually, for the second season of the TV show, became the script editor, it was absolutely brilliant. And I had absolute ball with that woman. She was amazing. And I even didn't mind the amount of time she would phone me at 3:00 in the morning and wake me up and say, "Darling, I've got this problem with this line. I don't think Sarah Jane would say but. She'd say and." And I'd go, "Liz, do you know what the time is?" She said, "Yes, it's 3:30 in the morning. You're awake, aren't you?" "Well, I am now." And we've just had huge laughs at 3:00 in the morning. And, I'd say, "Look, we'll talk to you. Let me make a cup of tea." So we'd be talking while I was making tea, and it was just brilliant. And then I'd go back to sleep at about 5:00 and think, I've got to be up because I had to be in I had to be in my office for the whole duration of recording. So if they were starting at 7 in the morning, I had to be in the office at 7 in the morning. And at 5 in the morning, I'm still having conversations with the leading star of this, who also, by the way, has to be on location and ready to go at 7 in the morning because she wants to say and rather than but. And I loved that, and I miss that about her, because that was not a one-off occurrence. That was a fairly common occurrence. And sometimes she would just ring me at 3:00 in the morning and just go, "Darling, it's your leading lady here, and I've just decided I wanted to ring you at 3:00 in the morning just to wake you up." And I'd go, "Well, thank you. That's very kind of you." And she'd go, "So, what's it like on your part of Cardiff? In my part of Cardiff, it's raining." And I'd be going, "It's raining in my part of Cardiff as well, Liz, because I live about 3 blocks away from you, and I can actually see that your light is on in your flat at the moment. I know, I thought I'd check, I watched your light go on as I rang your phone. And that's what she was like. And we just had a laugh. And we had, 4 years of that. And she was brilliant. She was absolutely brilliant.
Did she enjoy the change from Sarah Jane coming back? And
did she enjoy it? I don't know. Did she enjoy it? Yes, of course she enjoyed it. She loved it. I don't think she ever stopped being nervous. I don't think she ever quite believed in the success of, not the show, because she 100% believed in that. I think she had a problem accepting that people would want to watch a 50-something-year-old woman playing the lead in a kids' TV show. And I think she never... I remember when she died, the thing that we all were saying about it is that outpouring on CBBC that happened. I wish she could have seen that, because she would have finally accepted that everybody loved her. And I think Liz's psychology was she would never quite believe that. She would never believe that she was as popular as she was. And it's just a shame it took her dying, and she still never would have known about how popular she was. And there's a horrible irony about that. She was deeply insecure about that sort of thing. And she just never needed to be, because she was so talented and so nice. And she was so brilliant with those kids. Tommy and Ange and Danny. They learned so much from her about being actors. And I think they learned a lot about life from her as well, because, Liz is quite... If you ask Liz a straightforward question, you get a straightforward answer. She doesn't mollycoddle. And I think, that was a very tight little group of those 3 kids. So yeah, it was a good run. It was good fun.
Yeah, ended far too soon.
Oh, yeah. We could have gone on. I mean, as far as I know, the agreement from CBBC was this series keeps going until... Well, I mean, I think the agreement with Russell was this series keeps going until you stop wanting to do it, Russell. I don't think we ever sat down and thought, we're going to get renewed. I mean, we did, and the finance people worried about that. But we always kind of knew that at the back of our heads, it was like, we have a fairly open invitation from CBBC here to keep going until Russell doesn't want to do it. And Russell would not have stopped until Liz didn't want to do it. And everything was always, Liz, do you want to do another year of this? Yes, right, we'll do it. Do you want to do another 2 years of it? Yes, then we'll do it. It was very much led by what Liz wanted to do. And that's how it should be.
How big was Russell's involvement?
Huge. It was his show. Totally his show. I mean, he didn't... Well, he was more involved in it, I think, than he probably was with Tortured on the day-to-day basis. But it was definitely Phil Ford's show as a showrunner. But Russell was in love with Sarah Jane so much. I think probably the last season he was slightly more removed from, because he was doing the move to America around that time. But no, it was his show. It was his baby all the way down the line. Every character was his. Everything, and Julie as well. They were both very, very heavily involved in it. And then Phil looked after the actual script side of it.
What was the difference in technique for you in terms of going from the audio series to this TV series?
Oh, no comparison. The audio series, I was Russell. I was the showrunner. On the TV series, I was a script editor. And the script editor doesn't really have a huge amount of power. I mean, I work with the writers very, very closely. But, I'm not in charge of commissioning. I'm not in charge of deciding what the storylines will be. That's Phil's and Russell's job. So working on the TV show as a script editor is much more nuts and bolts, with the occasional ability to throw ideas into the mix. But usually I learned quite early on that the best time for me to be creative as a script editor is to do that with the writers, is not to do that with the execs. The execs don't need to know that I've had conversations with the writers. How about doing this? How about doing that? So that was my time to be creative, was working with the writers. And it helped that I knew Liz. It helped that I knew Sarah Jane. But then, having said that, so did all our writers. You got Gareth, you got Joe, you got Clayton, you got Rupert, you got Phil. They all knew Doctor Who back to sort of, the year dot. We were all big Doctor Who fans. So it's why it was quite a hard show. I know other writers tried to write for Sarah Jane over the years. And if you didn't know those characters and you didn't know the background and you didn't know what does and doesn't work in Sarah Jane, it wasn't like any other kids' CBBC show. To my mind, I was just say to Russell, and he said absolutely was what the intention was. To me, this felt like we were remaking classic era Doctor Who, and he was making new series Doctor Who. And I said, and this is Sarah Jane is that perfect little sort of made with a 21st century sensibility and technique, but with a foot very firmly planted in the 1970s and 80s. And if you didn't know that, if you didn't have that sensibility automatically in your head, writing for the show was quite difficult. And we were lucky, we were blessed that we had brilliant writers.
Yeah, I just recently rewatched all seasons with my 11-year-old, and he has just fallen in love with Sarah Jane like I did, the same age.
Quite right too, because that's what the show is about. It's making, I say, for me, it's a show in my head for 8 to 12-year-olds with a sort of little something for the older ones as well. But, you mentally go, this is for 8 to 12-year-olds to grow up with and be in love with in the same way that Harry Potter was. And I think, it's a brilliant show. I'm so proud of Sarah Jane Adventures. It's absolutely wonderful. There isn't a bad step in it.
All right, so it's always great to hear from Gary, isn't it?
His memory and what the detail he has is extraordinary.
All right, so we'll start off with story 1 from the series, which is called Buried Secrets, and then we'll have a chat with some of the makers and stars of that particular story, and throughout we're going to be interspersing chats with each of our guests. So you will get to know their voices, no doubt, or if you're watching on YouTube, and you should be subscribing and commenting too, you will get to know them there too. So I'll read the blurb for Buried Secrets. Sarah Jane Smith believes her days as a crusading investigator are behind her, safe from those who tried to destroy her. But others believe she has a destiny, and they will stop at nothing to prevent her fulfilling it. A trip to Florence to help an old friend leads to the unearthing of a murderous conspiracy buried within the city's catacombs.
Here are the headlines at midday. Police are investigating the sudden death of Hilda Winters. She was under house arrest awaiting trial for the theft of sarin nerve gas pellets 2 years ago.
Josh, try to think of this as a fresh start. For all of us. Keep in touch, okay? Ciao!
A fresh start, eh? I wish it were that simple.
I spent too many years looking over my shoulder. I don't have to do that anymore. I found my place in the world. The past is past.
I know this face. Even allowing for the decomposition, I recognize him.
Oh my god! It's Professor Brunetti!
Look, I don't know how you found me, but I have absolutely no comment to make about Miss Winters. Now just go away.
I'm not a reporter. My name's Will Sullivan. You knew my brother, Harry.
Sarah? Who's it from?
Miss Winters?
Let me look. Dear Miss Smith, if you're reading this, it means I'm dead and my fears have proved correct. What the... But she's dead!
Yes. She sent me a letter from beyond the grave. The exemplar crass is opening.
More Latin rubbish.
It means Book of Tomorrow.
The exemplar crass contains several predictions, hence the name, Book of Tomorrows. But these weren't vague prophecies open to any interpretation, like those found in the writings of seers like Nostradamus. The predictions in the exemplar crass were apparently very specific, and several of them made mention of an apocalyptic event due in our lifetimes.
Josh? Josh, can you hear me? Josh, you alright? Josh! What did you say your name was?
Will Sullivan.
Why don't you sit down, Will Sullivan?
Here are the facts of the trivia. Buried Secrets. Number 2.1 in the Sarah Jane Smith range, story code was 6J06. Written by David Bishop, directed and produced by John Ainsworth. Starring Elizabeth Sladen, Jeremy James, or Jez Fielder, depends what name you want to use for him, and Sadie Miller, with Tom Chadbon. We spoke with Sadie on episode 60 of The Sirens of Audio. You can go back and have a listen. Recorded 3rd of November 2005, released January 2006. It had been 3 years since the previous Sarah Jane story had been released, Mirror Signal Maneuver. Music, theme and sound design by Steve Foxton and recorded with the Moat Studios. Sarah Miller, as you probably know, was the real-life daughter of Elizabeth Sladen and actor Brian Miller. The character of Will Sullivan was originally going to be Companion's Harry Sullivan's nephew, not his brother. Tom Chadbon, who plays Will, was in Doctor Who's stories The City of Death as Duggan, and The Mysterious Planet. He was also in Blake's 7 episode Countdown as Del Grant and would return to Big Finish to play that character in a series of audio plays. The Medici Tombs Excavated was based on real life events. The newsreader, Sean Lay, is a real BBC news reader and could be heard on Radio 4's The World at One. And the story was a homage to the Mask of Mandragora. And that's the facts and the trivia.
So how did you feel about getting into this story and the first thing they do is announce the death of Hilda Winters?
I must say, that is probably the thing I disliked the most about the whole series, which was series 1 was this amazing build-up.
Because it ended on a cliffhanger, didn't it? It's I'll be back, says Hilda Winters.
Yes, I love Hilda. It's just an amazing character. What you can immediately tell from the opening moments is the fact that the entire production team has changed. And Doctor Who did this all the time. Lots of TV shows did this all the time. I know, the bill would change produce, and suddenly they'd blow up the station, kill half the characters. Every new producer and writer wants to leave their mark. That's okay. And it was obvious that this was going to take a whole new direction. And to be honest, once you get into it, I love the direction it takes. Mm-hmm. It is exciting and vibrant and very different to Series 1. As you've listened, I'm sure you all listened to our Series 1 retrospective. I love Series 1. I love the different locations, the different stories. I love the global. I love Season 1. But this is a totally different tact. I love it too. But it's going to have a much stronger overriding theme. Series 1 had one in terms of Hilda and the villain. This one, though, it's going to be much more ingrained. But it lets you know straight away, by killing Hilda, we are in a totally different world. And we're leaving Series 1 behind. So it was a shock. I was looking forward to the cliffhanger. I was looking forward to having more of Hilda. But that's okay, because what we got was, I think, probably even better. But yeah, I was surprised. What did you think?
Yeah, it was a bit of a shock, wasn't it? It's like, that I wanted to know what else she was going to do. But very quickly we got into this new sort of story arc, whereas there was a kind of a story arc in Series 1 there was like a thread that went through, less of an arc, more of a thread. This was very, very story arc heavy right from the start. And so the major changes were new producer in John Ainsworth. We have a writer for every single story, same writer, David Bishop. And we've got that definite arc that's going through, which is building up and up through each story. Some amazing cameos from people in here. We've got, well, you mentioned Tom Chadbon. Some people, I think, are just made for radio. Their voices are just incredible, and his is one of them. Yep. Not only is he great to watch on screen in Doctor Who, Blake 7, etc., but I think, was this his first time with Big Finish, Tom Chadbon? So
I'm not sure, but I think it probably was, actually.
It was pretty early on, so it was after this he would have come back and played Del Grant.
He did, as
much for Blake 7. Yeah, because it was a long time, and lots of Blake 7 people in this series as well. So we had Stephen Greif and Jacqueline Pearce as well, playing some major roles that would be all the way through. There were a couple of cameos in stories, but then they would be very heavily starring in one story each, I think it was.
Yeah, I will mention them more as Facts and Trivia later on when they had a more major part. But yes, definitely.
Yeah. But it was great to hear their voices too. So a character called Dexter, David Goodison. So it was interesting to hear his voice. throughout as well.
Davros.
Davros himself. And he's a great radio actor too. I think David's done lots of radio over the years. Actually,
Yeah.
I think that's his main acting profession is radio. So and we start to get. There's a few different arcs. There's the Sarah Jane arc. There's the sort of the larger arc, which incorporates other elements from a previous Doctor Who that are going to come in. We've got the Josh Townsend arc that begins as well, because we've got Josh taking a major decision in this episode that starts to cause friction, and causes friction between him and Sarah throughout the rest of the series.
He has a big character arc that his character goes on, and once again, something I wasn't expecting.
Yeah, and it's, although I felt by the end of it, I thought I should have been expecting this. This is obviously what it's been. I think it was just written so well by David Bishop. So
it does. I mean, it does retcon series 1 a bit, but it does in a good way with Josh's character, because it redefines how he entered season 1 and why he entered the first series. But that's okay. It was good to do.
Yeah,
it felt like it had been planned out, even though it obviously wasn't.
So let's have a listen to what producer John Ainsworth has to say about this production.
4 years after the first season of Sarah Jane Smith was first released, the second season was finally going to be produced, but this time with a new man in the hot seat. And John Ainsworth took over the job of producing the second season. John, thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for asking me.
Listen, it's been 4 years between seasons. Now, you wouldn't have had much to do with the first season. Did anything at all? Were you aware of the first season?
I was aware of it, but yes, I had nothing actually to do with it. I think I listened to it even before I knew I was doing the second series. So, but yeah, I was just part of the audience really at that point.
So, at what stage? Who asked you, and how did you end up getting hold of the second season?
I can't. It would have been either Gary or Jason would have suggested that I do it. I mean, I produced the Judge Dredd series, which I think might have come to an end or been in a sort of hiatus point at that point. So maybe they realised I was just sort of, available and had the capacity to take it on. So yes, I think it probably would have been Jason just said, "Oh, we'd like you to do this. We want to do 4 releases for this one rather than 6, which the first series was." And take it from there, really. Yeah.
So what was your starting point? How did you decide what you were going to do, how it was going to work?
Well, I think I listened to the first series and sort of decided what were the most successful points of it. And I think Test of Nerve, which is the one that David Bishop wrote, I think, for the first series, I think that was generally considered as the sort of high point in terms of it was like the best story. So I think maybe I took the lead from there. But I did want to do something quite sort of different with it, I think. I think initially I wanted to do something actually more different than we actually ended up doing. I think I was a little bit... I think, if I remember rightly, I didn't want it just to be Doctor Who without the Doctor and Sarah, if you see what I mean. So I think I wanted it to have a very different sort of feel, perhaps more realistic and gritty sort of feel, more like a sort of modern day thriller, I think. And initially, with that in mind, I did actually talk to some other writers about ideas, but that eventually didn't come. It turned out to be too radical. I mean, I should point out Liz was involved very much in discussions about this all the way through. She was very hands-on.
So, what point had you met Liz beforehand? Is this, when did you meet Liz?
I think I'd met her, but didn't know her particularly well. I don't think. I think we initially spoke briefly on the phone, and then I remember we met for coffee in London off Oxford Street and had a big sort of chat about it then. And then after that, it was quite regular phone conversations, sort of back and forth with sort of ideas and opinions about what way we should take it and everything. I mean, a lot of far more than I've ever had on any other series, and certainly not with, I've never had a lead actor be so involved.
So was Liz looking at storylines and story concepts?
Yeah,
and draft scripts?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, she was very much involved and, had opinions, which was great. So we had, I'd loved all this, it wasn't interference, it was collaboration, and I loved it actually. It was a really rewarding experience, because I held her in regard, and opinions about acting and performance and story I thought were very valid, and so she had a lot to contribute, I felt.
So has any other actor you've ever worked with ever had done that, been that involved?
Any other actor
in Big Finish?
Not to that extent. I had a little bit of that with Paul Darrow on Blake 7, a little bit, but not. No, generally most people are sort of happy to sort of. Actors will always have opinions on the scripts, but it's usually, like someone like Colin Baker, he cares very much about the story. But if he's concerned, he might sort of give me a call a few days before a studio, or certainly say something in the studio and make little tweaks, but not in the sense of actual whole script development. No, so that was quite unusual. But that's what she wanted to do. That's the way she sort of cared about it so much, and wanted it to be good, wanted it to show the character in a way that she thought was true to what had already gone before and been established. She cared very much about Sarah, I think, and how she was portrayed. So that was good, really. So after much back and forth and talking, the decision we made was to actually ask David Bishop to write the whole series, all 4 episodes. And we went to him, I think, mainly because he'd written Test of Nerve, and I think Liz must have agreed with me as well, that Test of Nerve was a really strong story that she had liked as well. And the reason wanted someone to write all 4 was because there was quite a through line, a story arc, and it seemed to make sense. And I'd worked with David before, of course, on we'd done a lot of Judge Dredd stuff together before, and I think he'd done the Doctor Who and Bound before. Yeah, that would have been before this. So yeah, so David and I were used to working with each other, and I knew he was good, and was good fun to collaborate with, really. So that's where we go. See, it's all coming back as I'm talking to you.
So did you ask David to develop storylines, or did you have in your head where you wanted to go? How much was it you in terms of giving guidance for any of the arc at all?
I'm trying to think. I'm sure there was something that influenced me, and I was on the verge of saying it was the series Alias. But I know that's not true because it was only later. Well, I hadn't seen Alias at that point, so it couldn't have been Alias. But I remember Lee Binding, who did the covers for us, when he'd read the scripts, he actually sort of flagged up there was some similarities between Alias and what we had done. I think there's a bit there's a bit in the first story where Sarah finds, she finds a portrait of herself buried behind a wall. Is that right? I haven't heard it for ages. You're looking blank. No,
I only listened to it yesterday.
Oh, right. And in the crypt, isn't there a drawing or something of her?
I think. There's all the prophecy about Sarah and what was going to happen in the future that was done from the past.
Maybe that's what I'm thinking. Maybe it was just the prophecy, and maybe it's in Alias. There was actually, they discover this drawing of the main character in Alias in a crypt or something with a similar sort of prophecy type thing. Yeah,
they just talk about the fact that in the prophecy she's described and she matches the description. But
that must be it.
But there's hundreds of Sarahs that match the description, but they narrowed it down to Sarah Jane Smith.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And I think that element was a little bit similar to something that happened in Alias. And at the point that Lee Binding pointed this out, I think I was a little bit worried that it looked like we deliberately copied it, even though I'd never seen the TV series. So it was just a coincidence. In hindsight, I don't think anyone made the connection or raised it as a concern. But I think I was quite keen on this whole idea of, sort of prophecy and and that be the through line for the story. And I think that's probably what I was suggesting to David. And then from that point, we just sort of developed it.
Okay, so let's hear from writer David Bishop.
The first Sarah Jane Smith audio dramas came out 2002. And then there was a gap, a hiatus after that. And there was talk of a second season and the second series, and then not much really happened with it. And then I guess sometime in 2005, Big Finish were looking to do a second series of the Sarah Jane Smith audios. And then John Ainsworth, I believe, was producer for it, and reached out to me and asked if I would be interested in writing for it. And I said, absolutely, because, I'd really enjoyed writing Test of Nerve, although it was very early on in my Big Finish career, as it were, of writing audio dramas. And by this point, 2005, I'd written a lot more audio dramas. I'd written for Sapphire and Steel. I'd done Full Fathom 5, My Unbound, 5 or 6 Judge Dreads by that point, and I'd written a radio play as well. So for the BBC. So as a consequence, I'd written a lot more audio drama, and I felt a lot more comfortable and felt able to do more and be more ambitious in the storytelling. Now, as I understand it, John was had talked to other writers and had sort of gone down the path with other writers to write for series 2, and for whatever reason that hadn't worked out. None of which I knew at the time, of course. Everybody wants to think that they just to get the offer. But hey-ho, I got the job. So John reached out to me and asked if I would be interested in writing for the series. And I was like, yes, absolutely, I'd love to. I'd love to write more for it. And I can't remember for the life of me how it was. Anyway, whether he asked me to write the whole thing or pitch ideas for it. I'd need to check my notes, actually. But the idea was that I could write 4 stories, write the whole of the series effectively. And therefore, there was the capacity to sort of introduce threads and story elements and different strands and have them run through the totality of the story. So it would be, although it would be 4 standalone stories you could enjoy in isolation, if you listen to all of them in sequence, it built to a much larger story leading to a certain, from one place to another. So actually kind of a forerunner for the box sets that Big Finish does now, where the expectation is that you get the lot and you sit down and you listen to them all. But in those days, it was still sort of monthly release. So they had to work as standalones rather than this built into a complete story. So that was an interesting challenge. And I think it was the first time, I mean, it's 4 hours of drama effectively. So it was like writing my own little mini TV show or radio drama. So I was like, oh, I couldn't wait. It was like, this was, dream come true for me.
So what were the changes that you needed to make in terms of Sarah Jane Smith character? Were there things you were asked to change, incorporate, move away from the first series? I
mean, Sarah's very paranoid in that first series. There's that sense of she's always looking over her shoulder. She's not quite on the run, but she doesn't trust the police. She struggles to trust other people. And I think the initial idea was to make her less paranoid and have her somewhat slightly removed from things. So she's not trying to be, at least my memory is, she's not trying to be a working journalist quite so much. March 2005, it seems, I'm writing proposed plots and character arcs. So I pitched 4 story ideas for series 2. And the first story I pitched got completely nixed, got cut down. And it was about, so the notes I've got here, I think it was about, it was a problematic story. It was all going to be about experiments that were going to give Nat the ability to walk again and to sort of remove her disability. And everybody felt that was problematic, to put it mildly. And in retrospect, they were absolutely right. My initial pitch for the first story got completely binned. So I had to come up with a replacement for that. And of course, in the second series, it's Harry's brother that we meet, who's the significant character. And originally that was going to be Harry's nephew, was my original pitch. It was all going to revolve around Harry's nephew, because it was like trying to figure out the differential of who was going to play what role in the story. Because it was going to end up with, when it was Harry's nephew, the danger was that Harry's nephew was going to be a contemporary of Josh, and it ended up with Sarah just being the mother hen of all these whippersnappers running around the place. So it was decided instead to go with Harry's brother, because that would it meant that Sarah would have a contemporary rather than everybody being 20 years younger than her.
Though, of course, when Russell T Davies would create the Sarah Jane Smith TV series, they'd all be whippersnippers running around a mother hen.
Oh, completely, yeah. But then that's for a different audience. That's
more for family, kids audience rather than adults. Yeah,
exactly. That's aimed at 7 to 12-year-olds effectively. So that's entirely appropriate. You want to have the kids at the foreground, and then the Sarah Jane character operating and assisting them and guiding them and leading the way with her knowledge and everything. So completely appropriate for the Sarah Jane adventures. But there was a danger of everybody being far too young and Sarah being cast in the role of, mother hen or grandmother hen if you're not careful. So the first story got completely put into the bin. And so I needed to come up with a replacement for that first story of what that could be. And the reason it ended up being Buried Secrets is I was, at the time, researching an idea for a series of historical thriller novels, which I have since now finally started writing and publishing as D.V. Bishop. So I spent 20 years not writing those books. So at this point, I think I'd done about 8 years of research into Renaissance Florence and the Medici and the crypts and the tombs and all of that. So that's where Buried Secrets came from. Was I thought, well, I need a new plot in a hurry, and I've got all this knowledge and all this research I've done. I could stick those two together and come up with a story here that could be a way to pull the threads together, and also as a callback to Mask of, I never know, is it Mandragora or Mandragona? I never know. How do you pronounce
Mandragora.
That?
Mandragora.
Okay, I'll go with you on this one, because I've heard people say it different ways, and I never know how you meant to say it.
When I was reading the Target novels and I hadn't seen it on TV yet, it was always Mandragora in my head. But, of course, in the TV series, it's Mandragora.
Yeah, well, there you go. Yeah, I'm not sure. We had a very patchy broadcast of the Tom Baker stories originally in Doctor Who. We didn't even get Genesis of the Daleks until the 1980s, for God's sakes. They just left out whole chunks of things.
We had
so I'm not sure. No, I was convinced that those clams eating Harry's foot were going to be the best thing in the world ever. Because all I had was, the Target novelization telling me what they look like. Oh, that sounds incredible. Anyway, that's a different podcast. So I it was a way to tie those elements together and set up the idea of the helix from Mask coming back 500 years later and the anniversary of that, and the idea that it would come back again. So that's where I managed to sort of pull those threads together, reach back into the backstory of Sarah Jane and her adventures in the TARDIS, and start to draw that arc that would cross all four stories and get you to where it finally concludes with the big cliffhanger that drove some people absolutely potty. But there we go.
Yes, no, absolutely potty. That's a dreadful cliffhanger. And
I'm still potty.
We actually asked John, was there plans for a third season to resolve it? And he was sort of saying, well, it wouldn't have been him and bad luck. Someone else could have dealt with it. So did you?
I think that was probably. I think that may have been my as well.
Without giving away what the cliffhanger is, we are encouraging people to buy all these and listen to them. But in terms of, did you in your head have a resolution for that?
I mean, in the ideal, what you would have is you would have had the sound of the TARDIS just at the final moments. You might have just heard a faint wheezing, groaning noise in the background with the implication. And then you could have started series 3 if it happened anywhere and any time, and Sarah could just be waking up. And either she wakes up and, oh, was it all a dream? And no, it wasn't. And how did she get back here? Or she's accused of trying to blow up, the space shuttle or whatever it was called. Or else she's in a different place in time, and she can be earlier, later, you could move her to wherever, and the implication being that the Doctor has saved her, or she's found some means to save herself.
Okay, so you thought TARDIS being there didn't even occur to me. I was so far removed from Doctor Who, and it was her own story, her own place. The TARDIS being what she was seeing didn't even occur to me. But there you go.
Yes,
each their own.
I could see them. I mean, for all we know, it's whatever her name, Jenna Coleman's character, whose character name I've now completely blotted out of my head, who went round changing all of history and arranging things.
Clara.
There we go. Clara could have turned up and saved her, for all we know these days.
Tom Chadbon, courtesy of Big Finish magazine.
When I get a script, I read it, and then I read it for what my character knows about what's happening to him. When I first read the first 2 episodes, I had no idea. So I played it quite straight. That was quite good, really, but I'm hopeless with the overall plot. I leave that to the director and the editor and the writers. I just do the best with what I'm saying. Well, I think he's what the script says he is. I mean, he's a sort of public school. Josh takes exception to him because he's sort of the sort of one that's a bit of a red rag to the bull to a chap like Josh.
And Philip, it's such a pleasure to have back again for this episode, Jez Fielder.
So previously we talked about season 1. It went down really well with fans, but it would take 4 years before a second season would happen. What was your understanding at that time in terms of why it would take so long to come back?
Well, interesting. I didn't really know what was happening, and I don't know if anybody else did either. I'd heard that it had gone down quite well, and the reviews have been very good. I remember that. Some of them very kind, but it was a pretty decent product, I thought, and Liz carried it majestically, and so there was kind of radio silence on it, and you don't want to be pestering people about it. And I was, as you know, I was doing a load of, between the 2 series, I was banging out a load of Judge Dredds, and I was and Nick was giving me work in Dalek Empire, playing Herrick, which I really enjoyed. In fact, Dalek Empire is probably what I got the stupidest voices to do, and that was just absolute joy. So there was quite a lot going on in that period, and then, but I'd occasionally see Gary and John, who took over from Gary on it, and then I talk to Nick, and they go, "Oh yeah, no, we are. That's still on the yeah." Well, and it was like, okay, nothing was really coming through. Then I was lying in bed one Sunday morning, and my phone rang, and it was my old mate Mark Donovan, who has done lots of stuff for Big Finish and was made a number of cameos in the Sarah Jane adventures. And he said, "What are you doing right now?" I said, "I'm in bed." "Why?" He said, "Because come to the Hilton in Paddington or Edgware Road or something. I don't know where it was. It was a big hotel somewhere in London." I said, "No. Are you there? What, Mark? What's going on? I'm frightened. What's?" He says, "No, it's a Doctor Who convention." I went, "Oh right. No, there's United are playing at 3:00, and I'm just going to go to the pub." No. Come here, because people are buying me drinks. There's loads of fans, and they've listened to the audios. It's not just the TV. It's not just the TV lot getting special treatment. Come on, you'll get loads of beer. I was like, "This is a different proposition, Mark. I'll be there in 45 minutes. So I go to and sure enough, this book, the Big Finish audio book, had just come out. And so this is being touted around. This is beautiful heavyweight thing. And people are coming up to me going, "Oh, look, Mark Gatiss has said something nice about you in the Phantasmagoria." I was like, "Shall we see that?" "Oh, God bless him, he has." And like, would you sign it for me?" I was like, "Yes, if you get me a pint of Guinness." And this is just, I was like, "Oh yeah, we'd love to buy you a drink." "Oh yeah, great, buy me a drink then." So I had sort of 7 or 8 pints of Guinness down. Then Liz turns up, and I didn't even know she's going to be there. She's like, so we must go and have a chat. So we went up to some, I believe they call it an anteroom, and we sat down and we were just chatting away. And then she goes, they want to do another one." I said, "Oh, they do? I said, I haven't heard. I mean, I've spoken to a couple of people about it, and they were like, yeah, it's sort of, yeah, we'll come back to you. She goes, yeah, no, I got a call last week, so it's cool that I've seen you. What do you think? Do you think we should do it? I was like, you really? What do you want me to say, Liz? No, I think it's a terrible idea. I don't want to work with you again. That we should just leave it at one. And she went, so you mean we should do it? I said, well, yeah, that's what I mean, Liz. Yeah, we should. She goes, the fans liked it, didn't they? But this is the mark of Liz, right? she only cares about what it wasn't for her. It wasn't for Sadie, and it wasn't for me. It was for the fans, and the fans liked it. And she wanted to chew it over and say, like, if the fans liked it, we should do it, right? And I was like, yeah, of course. But we had fun, Liz, didn't we? She goes, oh yes, we had great fun. Well, then what's not to? She's like, you're right. I'm just being silly. And then about 2 weeks after that, John calls and says, oh, I'm taking this one, and we want to start getting this into pre-production. Are you on board? I was like, yeah, yes, obviously. You don't even need to phone me. So yeah, I know, but I have to tick a box. And that's and as I say, almost 4 years later to the month, it was recorded when they used David Bishop for all the stories, which I thought was an interesting choice. Yeah, because he was I've done lots of stuff with the Bish.
Well, I was going to ask about that. So it's a very different approach that John Ainsworth directed all 4 stories, one writer doing the whole series. What was your impression of that?
Well, I thought I think they tried with the various writers' idea on series 1. You had. I mean, I don't know. I'm not a script editor. I don't know how much of a consistency nightmare it was to kind of align Terrence Dicks and Barry Letts, trying to get them to have a kind of consistency of tone and character. And but I mean, that's the genius job of the script editor. It's the sort of unsung hero of all drama. And I suspect, although you should probably interview the script editor, but I suspect it was like, if we just get one guy in, I'm going to have fewer phone calls to make. I'm going to have fewer corrections, and I'm going to have less of a nightmare. And each of those first. It's not a criticism on anything I mean, the fact that the first one I did was written by Terrence Dicks, who wrote The 5 Doctors, I was very excited about. And it was a great idea having all these different writers. And they did 5 very, very different adventures. And that was fun. And I think the choice of bringing David in and just sort of having that one consistent narrative idea, and allowing the writer to sort of go over the edge of the page and go into another episode and have like a through line, which is what series 2 very much is. It's leading up to something. It's one big episode, I think, really. Whereas the other season 1 was very much five separate sort of vignettes. So.
Do you think? I mean, David Bishop in the first series was Test of Nerve.
Yeah.
Do you think that they just listened to the 5 stories and went, "That's actually what we want"? So that he nailed.
I think there's an element of that. I think Test of Nerve was probably the best. Was probably the strong. I think it's my favourite episode out of all of them. And it owes something, I think, to Department S. He says, going on about Peter Wingard again. But there is an episode of Department S with Anthony Hopkins starring opposite Peter Wingard in it. And it's called A Small War of Nerves. And it's, there's a disastrous chemical at large in a city with, a potential era-defining catastrophe. So I admire the fact that maybe there's a link, maybe it was accidental, I don't know, but there was something attracting me to that. And also, let me just tell you that the morning of recording of Test of Nerve, I walked in to find this elderly gentleman, not really knowing where he was, dressed very, very modestly. I honestly thought he was, just working there, cleaning up or something, and just this nice old man. And I said, "Oh, all right, are you all right, mate? Are you lost?" He's like, "Yes." I said, "Oh, what do you? Who do you need? Do you want Toby's the guy that runs the studio? Toby Robinson. Do you want me to find him for you?" I'm looking for the green room, actually. I said, "Oh. Well, I'm going there as well. Are you doing the audio?" Oh, yes. I said, oh, well, hi. What? I said, I'm Jez. He says, oh, I'm Roy Skelton. And I went, oh, wow. Are you really Roy Skelton? He said, well, yes. I said, can you do my answering machine? Roy Skelton, obviously celebratingly being a Dalek in the early days, was also Zippery from Rainbow, the voice of my childhood. And sadly, because I moved away from the UK, my number's gone and the answering machine's gone with it, which is such a shame. But basically, if you phoned me before I went away to France, you would hear Roy Skelton saying, and you know, what a lovely boat. And he was brilliant in it. He was really brilliant in that Test of Nerve. So very fond memories of that one, I think. Yeah, but your point about did they think that they'd probably hit the nail on the head more with that than any of the other episodes? Very, very possible.
Okay, so let's have a closer look at story number 2. Philip, Snowblind is the name of the story, and here is the blurb. Sarah Jane Smith travels to Antarctica, where her friend Will is part of a research team studying global warming. But someone at Nikita Base is a murderer, and everybody has a guilty secret. When a massive storm severs all communications, the killer strikes and the truth is revealed. Will anyone get off the ice alive?
Sarah, you've only met this Will Sullivan once, and now you're travelling halfway around the world to visit him.
I'm going to see how Munro and his team are spending Aunt Lavinia's money. Visiting Will while I'm there is a happy coincidence, that's all.
Nikita Base, this is Echo Romeo 79er out of McMurdo. How's your weather? Over.
Good landing conditions at present, but be advised, situation is deteriorating.
Jack's coming into land. He's bringing 2 visitors with him.
One is Sarah Jane Smith, who helped sponsor this study.
Why didn't you mention they were coming earlier?
I wish you hadn't come, Sarah.
What? You invited me, remember?
Yes, but you couldn't have picked a worse time to arrive. Munro took a swing at me. I think he's cracking up. He's been getting increasingly paranoid since the others left.
No doubt Sullivan told you how he got that black eye.
Well, to be fair, it took some coaxing.
I'm sorry I hit him. He's not the real troublemaker. It's that woman.
Morgan?
A few holes in the ground don't get people excited. But what we found beneath the ice, that could change the world.
What is your problem?
Problem? Why should I have a problem?
You've been giving me grief since we first met.
You're jealous, aren't you?
You and Morgan are stupid.
No, of Sarah and me.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Look, if you're trying to frighten me, you're doing a pretty good job. What? Oh!
Can't you make this thing go any faster?
I'm trying.
Say that again. Let's try harder.
Hello? Someone there? Josh? Will?
The others have gone.
Dr. Monroe?
It's just you and me now, Sarah.
Whatever you do, don't come to Antarctica. It isn't safe for you here, Sarah.
Snowblind, the facts and the trivia. Number 2.2 in the Sarah Jane range. Story code was SJ07. Written by David Bishop, directed and produced by John Ainsworth. Starring Elizabeth Sladen and Jeremy James, or Jez Fielder, with Tom Chadbon. Recorded 4th of November 2005 and released February 2006. Music, theme and sound design was by Steve Foxton and recorded again at the Moog Studios. Nicholas Briggs is best known for playing Daleks, Cybermen and other monsters. He plays a very scary human being. Jacqueline Pearce, who plays Chessine in the Doctor Who story The Two Doctors, but is probably best known for playing Supreme Commander, then President Servalan, on Blake 7. She has first appeared on Big Finish on the 7th Doctor story Fearmonger, and would later play Servalan on many Big Finish productions, and also Cardinal Olestra in the War Doctor series. This story was a homage to the Seeds of Doom.
Yeah, I really love this story, Philip. It's probably, if anyone asked me what the standout story was, it would be this one. I think because it's a homage to the Seeds of Doom, and you've got the same setting there. It's got some really interesting characters. Yeah, I always enjoy Nick Briggs when he's doing humans, especially accented humans with with a villainous, I suppose the word is. Well, he starts off that way at the very least. But this also carries on continues on the arc that is happening, because the previous story ended on a cliffhanger with Will jumping on the phone and saying to Sarah, "Don't come to Antarctica. Please don't come to Antarctica. Whatever you do." And of course, she doesn't get the message and she comes to Antarctica. So it all goes from there. And then by the end of the story, we find out a new revelation about Will that we didn't know before. So I think overall this was a fantastic story. And we haven't mentioned much about Steve Foxen yet, because he's new for sound design on this series, and he's done a great theme tune, and he's captured the feel of Antarctica really, really well.
Yep. I mean, another mark actually that was a new production team was the new theme. I think the thing that appeals to me about this story is the whole base under siege. It is, I know it's a classic Doctor Who trope, but when you actually do a base under siege well with a small cast of characters, it's actually very engaging. And the way that David Bishop manages to split up the characters at different times, to have different conversations with different pairings, and still manage to put them in jeopardy. There's a few very powerful moments where it's quite nerve-wracking. And as I said, the sound design just adds so much to what's going on. And also the way that it's a homage to Seeds of Doom, but it's also a flip, because what you are expecting isn't there. And so that's a very clever part of the story that keeps you intrigued but doesn't happen.
Yeah. And what we did mention about the previous story was that it was a great character piece between Sarah Jane and Will Sullivan, them getting to know each other. So that relationship is starting to be tested by the end of this episode very much, because we find another arc. This series is just full of arcs, because we've got the Will Sullivan arc too. He comes in being Harry's brother quite innocently, and that changes throughout as well. And we're starting to discover that there's something deeper going on within this series than we initially suspected by Snowblind. So by the end of this, we have got another cliffhanger. Each episode ends on a cliffhanger, and I should say, big finish. I love the way, and I've said it before, I'll say it again, I love the way that each installment of this has a previously on Sarah Jane Smith a trailer before every episode starts, because it's I like that. I like the way it does that, and particularly with the output.
You need it because the complexity of the stories beforehand. I mean, if this was released today, it would have been released as a box set. They wouldn't have spread this out over 4 months. But that being said, there's something to be said about cliffhangers that lead you on to the next story, and lots of ranges used to do that, which I know people tend to just binge things now. But yeah, the one a month, I was so excited each month when this was coming out. I'm waiting for the next one to come. Waiting for my CD to arrive. It was agony. Back in those days, back before you had
it was before downloads, wasn't it?
Before downloads. So I was waiting in the post for it to come. And it was so exciting, just taking it out of its case and popping it in the CD player, which I don't think I even own a CD player anymore. It was great. And but all those links together, all those very, very exciting bits and pieces. And I think this is probably my favorite too. But I think because it is kind of standalone. You could sort of get away with it, but there's lots of links as well. So yeah, I don't think. No, you're right. I don't think you could listen to any of these actually by themselves. You really do need the whole series. Probably the fourth story is the most standalone-ish, but even that has lots of links to what's happened before that you won't understand unless you've listened to all of them.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, let's have a listen to what writer David Bishop has to say about this story.
Now, you went a lot more global with this, so you had Italy, Antarctica, you had Florida, space. So were there all your locations you chose in terms of where you wanted to go? Was John suggesting places to be?
Oh, it's a good question. I can't honestly remember I mean, I absolutely wanted it to, if not be like Sarah Jane's greatest hits, but there was the capacity to do callbacks, hence Antarctica, and obviously the callback to Seeds of Death. Doom. I can never remember which one's which. So that was a deliberate callback to that, and that was also inspired. There's a great graphic novel by Greg Rucka and Steve Lieber called Whiteout, which is about a US Marshal in Antarctica, and there's a murder mystery and they have to go around and solve it, turned into a not so good film starring Kate Beckinsale, which I cannot really recommend, I have to say, but it's a great graphic novel. So I was very inspired by that, and sort of to tell a story set in Antarctica, and that would dig into what they obviously didn't have the budget to do when they were doing Seeds of Doom. Yes, Doom.
That's the Ice Warriors with Patrick Troughton.
That's the Ice Warriors. I can never get the two sorted in my head. So obviously, what they did in Seeds of Doom, it's like, polystyrene balls in a studio at the BBC. It's not the most convincing version of the Antarctic ever seen on screen.
I believed it, can I say? I believed it was filmed. As a kid, I believed it was filmed there. They're such good cold acting.
Yes, with the beach ball. So it was, and a chance to play with all our expectations that come with that. Oh, is it going to be the chronology? What have they found under the ice? Are we doing our version of the Thing from another world again? So it was a way to do callbacks to the past, sort of a nod to people who loved Sarah Jane from her time with the Doctor, and use expectations and then subvert those expectations. You think it's going to be one thing, it could be another. So the Antarctic was a very deliberate setting. Florence was obviously because of my passion for Renaissance Florence, and then the callbacks to Mask. And then into space, it felt like it was a chance. I mean, at that point, space tourism was only talked about. They were trying to get it together, people, SpaceX and things like that. We were working towards space tourism, but it was still a gleam in the eye of the wonderfully named Bert Bruton, no relation, who and they were busy trying to get space tourism up and running at that point, because I think the shuttle had blown up in whenever it was, 2003. And so when was it? Well, a Challenger, and then the second one blew up because it was the second one went up.
Two went up.
Because it was 85, 86's Challenger, and then another one went up in the early 2000s, and that just killed the space program. And then we got to space tourism. So it was obviously that was coming. So it was a way to sort of future-proof the story and go, oh, well, this is what it's going to be like. And when I did the research, was slightly dismayed to discover that space tourism at that point was basically they were just going to fly up, leave the atmosphere for about 30 seconds, and then just come back down again. And that was the level of the ambition of space tourism. They weren't planning to send Teslas to Mars or anything else at that point in history, for better or for worse. But it seemed like it was the idea we could get Sarah back into space again, sort of back where she belongs, or back where, we know her best. So it was the chance to play with some of these motifs of the Sarah Jane story over the years and over the decades, and take her full circle and make her confront all these things about herself and about her history with the Doctor without saying the words "the Doctor."
So is Liz Sladen once again approving all your scripts and giving you notes on them all?
Yeah. I definitely had notes, and that's how the first story was kicked into touch. The original first story was rightly kicked into touch. Not so phased. Yeah. So and there was a lot of talk about what had Sarah been doing in the meantime, and the idea that not everything has to have a big global scale. The whole fate of the world doesn't have to be at stake in every story. So there was talk maybe she got involved with good causes or wildlife or the environment. Hence, we get to this notion of her living in a caravan on the coast, and how the small things are as important as the big things. It's not just about saving the world. Every story doesn't have to be about saving the world, and it should be a scale that reflects who Sarah Jane is. So an awful lot of that was coming from Liz. So I think, and John working with Liz and wanting to sort of, respect her wishes and make her happy and give her stories that she wanted to be able to, be enthusiastic about. Of course, when all of this was in development, which is 2005, we didn't realize she was going to be back on TV as Sarah Jane in School Reunion, which they were filming that while they were recording the second series of the audio drama. So sort of this shuttle diplomacy was going on. I think there was even a point at one stage where we weren't sure if the second season was going to go ahead or not, whether it was going to be kicked into touch by School Reunion.
I mean, in the end, School Reunion came out, long after these 4 stories came out, and they don't contradict each other at all, so they work quite well that way. Now, Natalie is only a piece of story 1, story 4. Was that a choice that you made, or was it a decision that you wanted it was going to be used less?
I'm trying to remember now. Yeah, I can't remember. John is probably will have a better memory of why she isn't in all the stories. I personally felt that figuring out, obviously there's some practical difficulties having somebody in a wheelchair going to the Antarctic for a start, because the Antarctic is not really designed to be wheelchair accessible. That's not the nature of it. So it created difficulties with some of the stories that we were looking to tell, but I can't remember whether Sadie was available or not, what was going on with her at that point in her life, and whether or not that was going to work. So it was trying to find the balance. And also with the injection of Harry's brother, you start to end up with a big cast of companions, and that pulls focus as well. So I think it was trying to find the right balance. I can't recall off the top of my head whether Nat was only going to be plugged into certain stories or not, and it was trying to figure out that. And also having Nat separate from Sarah and the two of them being somewhat estranged and then coming back together at the end gave us another arc to tell over the course of the 4 stories.
We're not going to give major spoilers, but I mean, there's the through lines based on the Mask of Mandragora and Sarah having meetings.
I've gotten that. Yes.
So yes, because Sarah had met, I forget what his name was, back in Mask of Mandragora, and she told him things he'd recorded, what she'd said, and anything she mentioned about the future he'd recorded, which what became the prophecy, which went forward. So it was kind of her,
clever, isn't it?
It was very clever. So I was sorry, was that you, or was that who brought in the Mandragora?
I can't honestly say it was definitely me, but I think David and I, and to some extent Liz, had a lot of conversation about it. So it's hard to actually pinpoint whose idea was what in the end, if you see what I mean. You sort of bouncing ideas off each other all the time, and out of that, comes the sort of concepts. But yes, now you've mentioned the Mask of Mandragora, I remember thinking that was a good sort of a lead from it, which I liked. So I would certainly have encouraged David to go along those lines. Yes, that's right. I've forgotten that. Gosh.
So you also bring in Harry Sullivan's brother. What did you need a Harry character? Was that why you did it?
Yes, I think. I mean, obviously, ideally, it would have been Harry himself. I think had Ian been alive. I think we decided we wanted, this other character, and I think we toyed around with that a little bit about who that could be, and we settled on Harry's brother.
Was Tom Chadbon always your first choice for the role?
I can't remember seriously considering anyone else. I mean, I hadn't worked with Tom before. I think we probably went with Tom, but A, he's good, and B, obviously he's got that sort of Doctor Who connection, even though it's not with Liz's era. So yeah, I was very happy to work with him. He was very nice and good fun to work with. He was very shy when he first turned up. I remember that, being surprised at how shy he was, and then but he seemed to soon get over that, and we all got on well. He was disappointed. Well, I'm giving it away actually, but he's not in the final episode, is he? So, and he was a bit disappointed about that.
So you bring back both Natalie and Josh from season 1.
Yes.
So what was the decisions in terms of, because Josh gets a very large character arc throughout the stories. Was what was the decision in terms of how you're going to use Josh and Nat? Was there much discussion in terms of how they should fit in? And in the end, Nat's only in two. Sadie's only in story 1 and story 4.
Yes, I think that was sort of decided quite early on about Nat, not because of any sort of we didn't like the character or anything, but I think because we'd sort of got Tom Chapman in as well. It's a question of how many characters and how many actors as well. I mean, there are budget constraints as well, so I think it just sort of worked out like that. But that was sort of decided at quite an early stage that Nat would actually only be in a couple of them, which I'm sure Sadie was fine about. I think so. Yeah.
A few things that you did a bit differently with this series was you had the framing device of previouslys and next times, which is actually very unusual for Big Finish to make such an important part of previouslys and next times.
Right.
Had you been aware that was it a deliberate choice, or were you even aware that you'd done it?
I must admit I'd forgotten that we did that, to be honest. But I can see why we would have done. I think because I was quite aware that it was an ongoing story, so each episode made contributions to the story arc. And I suppose I was considering the possibility that someone might pick up episode 3, having not heard episode 1 and 2. And of course, they released, were they 1 month apart each? I can't remember. Did we do them monthly? I can't remember. So, maybe people just need reminding. I mean, I quite appreciate, previously on recaps, when I watch a TV show or listen to something, just to sort of, that's where we were. That's what was important, sort of thing.
In terms of Sarah visiting places, you go to Italy, you go to Antarctica, you go to space.
Yep.
Was the decision that you wanted to make the whole series a lot more global?
Yes, you saying that does remind me that I think that was something I was particularly keen about. I wanted it to sort of travel around to different locations, not just feel like it's just made in the home counties sort of thing, and give it a more international feel. I think that was quite deliberate, and I suspect something that Liz was quite keen on as well. Yeah.
The casting is just amazing. Tom Chapman, Jacqueline Pearce, Stephen Greif, some of the guest cast you bring in. Was that your job to do the casting?
Yes, because I was producer, but I was director as well for all of them. So yeah, I was. I did all the casting, I think. Yeah. I'm obviously apart. Nat and
Sadie and Jez.
Jez, yeah, Sadie and Jez.
He's Jeremy James, according to the cast list.
Jeremy James, yes, as he was then. But but I mean, I'd worked with Jez a lot on Josh Dredd as well, so I was very familiar with him. I hadn't worked with Sadie before, but that was very nice. But obviously they came with the characters that had already been established. But everyone else, yes, I cast. Jacqueline, I'd known for a long time as a friend. I remember being a little bit apologetic that it was a little bit too Servalan-ish, the role that I gave her. I felt I was guilty of typecasting her, and but yeah, she was fine about that. So yes,
I'm not sure that Jacqueline ever. So I was going to say, I'm not sure she ever got a role that wasn't Servalan like after Servalan. Was there? Because even if there was, she still played it. Even Chessine in Doctor Who. I was thinking the fearmonger.
I think she felt there was an expectation there and in the roles that she was given. I mean, she would like to have, I know she would have welcomed something radically different, It was interesting because when she died and I held a sort of memorial for her, and I put together a load of video clips from her career. And I realized actually everything before Servalan, or a lot of things before Servalan that she did in film and, like the Hammer films and things like that, she played far more vulnerable characters, almost the opposite of Servalan. That, she was quite timid and vulnerable side of it. And then as soon as Servalan happens, her television roles became all sort of Servalan similar, I think, really. And there was me being guilty of it again, asking her to play the keeper and doing the same sort of thing. But there we go. She didn't complain too hard, I know.
Courtesy of Big Finish magazine, Jacqueline Pearce.
Well, I played Servalan in Blake 7, and when John phoned me up to ask me to do this, he said, "I'm sorry, darling, it's Servalan Mark 8. Which it is, of course, but I don't mind at all. But first of all, I thought he'd said Margate. I said, "What do you mean Servalan Margate?" Servalan by the sea.
So what did you think of the makeup of the second season and the stories they did?
I thought it was actually far stronger. And again, it's no critique of the first one. The first one is what it is, but I think this is a very different premise to series 2. I think if you're coming at it having listened to series 1 and expecting the same sort of thing, you're not going to get it, and I think you'll be quite surprised. I think it's a lot bolder, it's harder, it's a lot more sinister. I mean, obviously, a lot of these things are built upon the sinister, but this one is quite literally out of this world. It's it has a wider remit, and it has more breadth. And as I say, with a one writer, you have that ability to know the safety of you can. This doesn't end for that writer, on page 112. It ends for them on page 480, and it was all leading up to this sort of extraordinary conclusion, which I do remember with enormous clarity, actually, because it was quite an emotional situation in the studio. It was like, I mean, I've never been on a soap opera that's run for 40 years and been part of it all, and everyone's sort of crying and having a breakdown at the end of it, losing their hair and things like that, but there was the conclusion of the story was, I didn't expect it. When I read it, I went, "What? No, you can't do." He's done it, and then that happening at the same time as knowing that was the final chunk to be recorded, and sort of everyone going, "Wow, this was really intense," because it was really intense. It made something incredibly memorable. I had to cry. I don't think I've ever had to cry on audio. I think that was the only time that it was entirely appropriate to have a complete breakdown. And yeah, it was. I loved it. I thought it was. Oh my God! It's actually, it's emotional depth. It's got to come from somewhere real. It's using those skills that people talk about with acting, and you go, "Oh, okay, so it's possible then. It's real." And yeah, I just remember everyone being really nice about it. "Are you all right?" Like, well, yes, I'm fine. I had to try and make that happen in my head, and then it just went. I think that was one of my favorite. It's one of my favorite experiences with the whole of my Big Finish career, actually.
All right, the third story in Sarah Jane Smith Series 2 is Fatal Consequences. Sarah Jane Smith has been attacked, stalked and shot by the acolytes of a doomsday cult. When she tries to turn the tables, Sarah discovers the Crimson Chapter has a weapon that could claim millions of lives, and her own actions may have instigated their genocidal plan.
Here are the headlines at midday. A medical research centre in Berkshire says it's close to synthesising an antidote for the deadly Marburg virus. The head of research at Pangbourne Scientific Laboratory, Dr. Gavin Dexter, calls the serum a major breakthrough.
These are colleagues of mine, Dr. Dexter. Whatever you have to say to me can be said in front of them.
We've been pushed into using extreme, unethical methods to achieve quick results, but the antidote could endanger countless lives in the future. I can't be a party to that anymore.
Dexter's not telling us everything.
I didn't tell him everything I knew either. He works for Mandrake, so he's linked to Chauffeur. He could well be part of the Crimson Chapter himself.
Don't blame yourself for the actions of madmen.
I have to. I'm at the centre of events I can't understand, let alone control. No, it has to stop. But first, we need to find out just who's behind all this.
You found out about Pangbourne's connection with the Chauffeur, haven't you?
Well, you mean Mandrake.
New name, same old tricks.
We've isolated a variant of Marburg that replicates at nearly 50 times the virus's usual speed.
Well, that means it'd incubate in hours instead of days.
Exactly.
Sir Donald?
For the past 24 hours, you've been trying to get the attention of the white chapter of the Orbis Portrayed.
And have I got it?
I offer you a deal, Miss Smith. Your life in exchange for all those outside.
And why should I believe you?
Your beliefs are immaterial. You're already dying, Miss Smith. You've nothing to lose.
So what you're saying is that the Crimson Chapter will wipe out everyone on this planet simply to prove themselves right?
Genocide will be committed in your name, Miss Smith. And only you can stop it.
Fatal Consequences, the facts and the trivia. Number 2.3 in the Sarah Jane range. Story code was SJ08. Written by David Bishop, directed and produced by John Ainsworth. Starring Elizabeth Sladen and Jeremy James, with Tom Chadbourne and Jacqueline Pearce. Recorded the 23rd of November, Doctor Who anniversary, 2005. Released March 2006. Music, theme and sound design by Steve Foxton, recorded at the Mo Studios. Stephen Greif is best known for playing Commander Travis in the series Blake 7, and we spoke to him before his passing in episode 70, and also the tribute episode, episode 143. Go back and have a listen. This was the only day of recording that writer David Bishop could attend, as he was studying for his MA in screenwriting at the time. And Tom Chadbourne was disappointed to discover he wasn't returning for the final story. He also offered Elizabeth Sladen's acting note, which apparently she kind of took okay. It's a bit hard to say with the story, but handing out notes to the lead actress isn't always the best thing to do as a guest star. And that's the facts and the trivia.
Okay, so things are ramping up now. This was around the same time as Da Vinci Code, wasn't it?
It was. Da
Vinci Code, so it's got that kind of a feel about it. I wonder if David was inspired by that, because at the time, that was huge.
Yeah, I mean, certainly episode 1 is the most Da Vinci Code-ish, but in terms of the acolytes and what's going on.
We've got secret societies and chapters and, warring factions and things like that. And at this stage, the other Doctor Who elements are really coming to the fore in this one. So we know for a fact by now who all these factions are. Can we spoil it now? Or is it too big to spoil?
I don't know. I was trying to work out how much we were putting spoilers or not.
Okay, so if anyone doesn't want to be spoiled, go and skip forward a couple of minutes, because I want to mention that this is bringing in elements from the Mask of Mandragora. So all these secret societies are all based on things that happened back then in that story. With is it the diaries of Duke Giuliano?
That's right. He recorded Sarah's visits and made a whole mess of her history because of it.
Yeah. So all that's coming, and all these various chapters interpret the diary entries differently, and therefore they have their own beliefs and mission. So shall we say? So the Fatal Consequences is dealing with the machinations of the Crimson chapter of the Orbis Postremo, I think it's called. Whereas they avoid calling it Demnos, the cult of Demnos, which is basically what it is, isn't it?
It is. No,
it's not the cult of Demnos. No, it's not. It's something different.
Yeah, it's different.
Anyway, it's all based on the diary entries of Giuliano. So I find that fascinating, and the way it's been weaved into the arc is really nice. Yeah, it just makes this seem such a Doctor Who story without the Doctor, doesn't it?
Yep, definitely. I guess in some ways this is probably the most similar to the first series in terms of you've got a bit more of a environmental story going on. You've got protests happening, those sort of ideas, but you also have a very big climax again, which will have big consequences. And a terrorist threat. So this is some more of the links to sort of what was going on in the first series. Actually, it's probably a lot like David Bishop's story from the first series.
And he wrote the terrorist one in series 1.
He wrote the terrorist one in the first series, and that was the one that Elizabeth Sladen liked the best, which is why David Bishop was asked to come back. So I think this is capturing some of that stuff from his first series. Though what's interesting is, of course, same writer for 4 stories, but each story is a very different setting, location and even a slightly different feel. So he doesn't just reproduce the same thing 4 times, but this is the one that probably has the most links to his first series story. And some great characterizations. And once again, those character arcs, this is very character driven. And where it takes some of those characters to is a bit of an ugly place for some of them.
Absolutely, because this is the Josh Townsend episode where everything just blows up right at the end, isn't it?
Yeah. And this is certainly fairly black in terms of, this is sort of the blackest that Sarah Jane will go. And certainly when the TV series comes back, being a kid's series, it's a much lighter view. But we're now heading into fairly black territory with Sarah Jane, and probably the blackest we ever get.
Absolutely. All right, let's hear from David Bishop, the writer of this story, once again.
And of course, Josh will have a very big character growth throughout the 4 stories. Was that your choice? You sort of went backwards and redid a few things, credited a few things with the first season which weren't really there. So you retconned Josh a bit in the second season. Was that your choice?
Oh, now you're asking. Okay, let me have a look at my notes and I'll give you a better answer to this. Okay, it says here, Josh, in the first story, he continues his role as the glue that holds Sarah's team together, the wisecracking working-class rogue with a bit of form and a good heart. But even he cannot keep Sarah and Nat together, and Josh is less than impressed when Sarah introduces a newcomer to the team. In the second story, Josh butts heads with Sarah's new best friend, feeling threatened by their education and intelligence. Josh proves his value to Sarah, ensuring he remains part of the team. Does he have another motive for staying by her side? In the third story, Josh begins acting increasingly strangely, distrustful and openly antagonistic, questioning Sarah's judgment. When it becomes apparent one of them is a traitor, Josh takes it upon himself to confront the other person. And then, with fatal consequences. Oh, golly, okay. It was, whereas Nat, after 4 years of being Sarah's personal almanac. Wow. This is obviously private notes. Nat wants a change. In the first story, she volunteers. Oh, so this is it. So she was going to volunteer for a revolutionary new medical treatment. Anyway, it all goes wrong and she exits. Originally, the plan was Nat was simply going to exit the series at the end of the first story. That was the original plan. And instead, we brought her back for the final story to sort of pull the arc together. I always had the idea, it was sort of explaining, why does Josh hang around with Sarah? Why is he, at her side through all of these things that are going to happen? And it was very much, I think a lot of this was informed by, I've got a description here. The traitorous survivor reveals their true colors like Nina in 24. So I've been watching an awful lot of the TV series 24 at this point.
I was devastated when Nina went bad, can I just say? I didn't see it coming. It was such a shock.
I'm still trying to figure out how Sam Ganji is able to hold his breath for 2.5 minutes while running around inside the nerve gas base, but that's a separate storyline, obviously. So I think I was very much enthralled to 24 storytelling, and everybody's got some hidden agenda, secret conspiracy, who's on whose side over here. And then we end up with the 2 chapters and in conflict with one another. So there was a little bit of Alias was another inspiration for this. For that ongoing story thread that runs through it, and the idea that Josh has got skin in the game, been willing to sacrifice himself to save because he believes a prophecy involved in things off ultimately. So that was always the trajectory for Josh's character in series 2, was to give him somewhere to go and to give him a reason for his actions.
Now, those notes you just reading were fabulous, but those your original notes, or was those notes John gave to you about where to go?
Well, we've got 2 documents here. We've got my original plot lines, and then we've got notes, fresh notes on SJS2. And those are notes which I'll have taken from John, which will be combined from John and Liz. Harry is missing for years, considered dead by most, but not Sarah, which is why she goes to this place and has the dinner. When they toasted the good old days, and she's mysterious about that. News reporter, So those are notes that have come on. It was going to be 4 years in between. I think we cut that down to 2 years rather than 4 years between series 1 and series 2 was the other thing that's been happening in the meantime. So those are notes from John and Liz.
So there was a decision taken not to do anything with Hilda, just to kill her off in the first 10 seconds?
Yeah, no, that was one of the givens that was handed to me when I started, was the whole Miss Winters storyline. They weren't bringing Miss Winters back. We were just going to write her straight out immediately at the beginning. I was like slightly disappointed because I love the character in Robot, and also I didn't really get to write her from memory and Test of Nerves. I think Peter did in the final story, but I never got that chance, and I was quite looking forward to writing a good Miss Winter story. The problem with that was we're going to have to devote the whole of the first story to tying up plot threads from the first series and the first season, and then restart the engines from story 2. So it felt like you either just nixed her in the first 10 seconds. Oh, by the way, she's dead. Move on. Or the alternative was you had to give her an entire story to play that out. And the decision was made before I...
That's actually very 24, isn't it? 24, you jump to the next season, suddenly 5 characters are blown up, the president's dead, and you've moved on to the next... Yeah, that's very 24-ish.
Yeah, exactly. We just go, 2 years later, she's dead. Move on. You just go, nah, we're not dragging those change into this. We're going to tell a whole new story. I mean, it meant we had a completely clean slate. We could just say it's X years later. Sarah's over here. Nat's doing this. She's away somewhere else. Josh is still kicking around. But so you got a clean slate. So you could absolutely sort of say, right, we make our mark from story 1, fresh story, because the downside is if we'd done episode 1 as a Miss Winter, the final Miss Winter story, is that it feels like just hangover from the first series, and it's harder for new listeners or new buyers to come in and pick it up without having to then go back and buy the first series. You want to make it as available to everybody as possible, of course, accessible to all.
Now, very unusual for Big Finish at this time, and even still today, is that all your episodes had previously on and next time on, at the start and beginning of every story. Did you actually write those, or did you decide which clips were going to be used for the previouslys and the next time? Because they really do hang the whole theme together.
Yeah, I think I wrote those, actually. I think I actually did sit down or write draft scripts for those, because, and actually they're really hard to do. Because I would sit there with my script. Pardon me. I would sit there with my script from the previous episode and go, okay, all right. So what did happen? What's the vital stuff? What's the material I want to pull out and have in the previously on, so that you could absolutely listen to that without having to refer to the previous one. And you know that. And the downside with that, of course, is that, oh, they've shown us this character from 2 years ago has suddenly reappeared in the previously on, so they're going to be back, aren't they? But no, I quite enjoyed writing those. I mean, again, it was part of the whole, slightly 24-esque feel of things, and just I always wanted to have, previously on Sarah Jane. That just appeals to the nerd in me, I have to say.
It's interesting that now you've mentioned 24, I'm seeing so much in terms of how you did structure, pacing, the short scenes. And I guess that was the action adventure of the time. I mean, 24 was just an example of it happening in many other places around the same time as that. Now, once again, amazing cast you got to play with. It's more of an ensemble piece as well. So you had Tom Chadbourne playing Will. You also had Jacqueline Pearce, Stephen Greif. Amazing David Goodison. Did you actually did you get to go to studio and watch any of this?
I did. I was there for number 3 that's Fatal Consequences? I guess it must be, yeah. So I was in the studio for the bulk of the recording of Fatal Consequences. What John did, which was very canny, in that he got me to write characters into, there was a lot of overlap characters that appeared in multiple stories, but there were only little bits of them, and then they were principally in one story. So he would have an actor come into the studio for the day, and they would record all their bits in one day, rather than have to get them back in for another day just to record 1 or 2 scenes. So I was there the day when they were filming with Tom Chadbourne and Jacqueline Pearce and Sarah Jane. So I was there. I was witness for the cat fight between Servalan and Sarah Jane, which was like chef's kiss moment as far as I was concerned. So yes, and Jacqueline Pearce had just come back from Africa because she was very passionate about sort of animal conservation and wildlife conservation, and so she'd been over in Africa, and she came back and she had the most incredible tan and made everybody else look like, you know, the weeping angels by comparison. Everybody was like, in Scotland we would call them peely wiley. Everybody was pasty and white, and Jacqueline Pearce looked like she'd just come from the sun. She was just bronzed. It was incredible. And yeah, she was just amazing in the green room, honestly, the stories. Woof. But she was just wonderful to have around. And yeah, so the day I went was mostly story 3 was being recorded because they were recording in a block. And I was like, I want to be there. Come on, Jacqueline Pearce. Who does not want to be in the studio when Jacqueline Pearce is recording her stuff? Because I've been down for... I'm pretty sure I was there for the recording of Test of Nerve. Yeah, I know I absolutely was. So yeah, but I couldn't be there for the recording of all of the episodes for series 2. So I had to choose my day as best I could. So that was the one I went for. So yeah, no, it was amazing.
So experiences like this for Stephen and Jacqueline in those early years of Big Finish, Blake Seven was years away from being acquired by Big Finish at that point. So right. I guess the experiences that they had recording with you then laid a good groundwork for the future?
I guess so, yes. I mean, but Stephen, I'd known Jacqueline. I mean, we were quite close friends for a long time anyway, long before any of the Big Finish stuff. Stephen Greif, I first met when I interviewed him along with Jacqueline and I think Sally Nivette and Jan Chappell at a Blake Seven convention. And bless him, Stephen always seemed to remember that. I think he liked the way I'd done it or whatever. So occasionally I would bump into him, probably at conventions with Jacqueline, and he would always remember me kindly. So and we did get him to do a role in Judge Dredd. So I'd worked with him on that, although I didn't direct that, but I'd met him. So we sort of knew each other by the time he came to do Sarah Jane, which was nice. So there was a sort of nice familiarity with him. Yeah. And then, of course, yes, years later, I ended up finally directing him as Travis. Yeah. Long time later.
Did you need to have them in studio very often? Because I know usually back in these days, did you film each story as a separate story over days, or did you actually tend to bring in cast and do some scenes and not need them? I mean, Jacqueline Pearce only has only a couple of scenes, the first couple of CDs.
Yes, that's right. I mean, there was definitely a sort of main recording day for each episode. So there would have been 4 studio days. But for characters like Jacqueline's and I think David Goodison maybe as well, and some of the others had sort of minor roles or minor bits in. So we would have recorded their scenes at the same time. I wouldn't have just bring them back for those little bits, I think. Yeah, so Jacqueline would have recorded all her stuff in about 1 or 2 days. Was she in 2 stories as a major character? I think she was, wasn't she?
Yes.
I can't remember now.
One in particular. Oh, no, really only just one major character.
Right. There's the third one. So he probably did all of the stuff in one day, I would suspect. Yeah, I think so. But Stephen Greif, I'm pretty sure he was in it 2 days. Because
he had lots to do in 3 and 4.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah. But yes, each story had its main recording day. Yeah.
So in the end, were you happy with what was produced?
Yes, I think so. Very much, actually. It was a really good experience. I liked all the stories. I remember number 3. It was interesting. I remember number 3 was the one that Liz had the most reservations about. And I think number 3 is quite heavy in terms of explanations and, plot revelations. And I think Liz felt she became a little bit sort of, because she spends most of it in a big conversation with Stephen Greif, I think, doesn't she? I think
a lot of it, yes. All the action's taking place with Jez.
Yes,
really, back where the poison, the infections are happening and things.
That's right.
So it's sort of outbreakish.
Is what?
It's very much like Outbreak, the film Outbreak.
Oh, right.
Dustin Hoffman film with the monkey infecting everyone.
Oh, that's right. Yes, of course. Yes. Yeah. Well, I think Liz was a little bit concerned that Sarah was a bit sort of removed from, the action side of things. However, my recollection is on release that number 3 was a particularly popular one, that everyone seemed to really like that one. Maybe it was because of the revelations and stuff and things in it. I think my favourite one was the second one, Snowbound.
In Antarctica.
Yeah, I just really liked the way that one came together, and it's quite self-contained, that one. I thought Nick Briggs was very good in it, quite sinister. And I love the little sort of red herring that we put in, that Sarah thought it was the crinoids. And then, of course, it turns out not to be. Yeah, I like that one. But I think, partly because of that sort of the global, different locations, I think each one has a distinctly different feel, even though there is an overall story, which is definitely what I wanted, and I think we did achieve that. So I was quite pleased about that.
Now, I believe one of the things that Liz wanted different from the first season was I think she felt the first season Sarah was a bit too paranoid, and dealing with paranoia, and she wanted her to be stronger. So was Liz happy with in terms of where the direction went with the character?
I think so. I do remember us having that conversation. Yeah, that paranoia was a big part of the first series, and I think both she and I felt, well, we've done that. Let's change the gear a bit. This isn't, so we didn't want that to be the sort of permeating feel, which hopefully we were successful about. I think we wanted her to be much more sort of confident and not looking over her shoulder all the time. Yeah, I do remember us having discussions about that.
At what point during the recording of this, or was it beforehand, did you find out that Liz had been involved with filming in Cardiff and that Sarah Jane was coming back to the main programme?
Well, she told me before they filmed it. It would have been during our discussions of about scripts and things, and then she told me she was going to, and I think she said she had a conversation with Russell Tito, to tell him that she was doing these audios and she still wanted to do them, and wanted to make sure that was still okay. And then she went off and filmed it. And of course, she wasn't allowed to tell us anything about the story. But I was concerned that we didn't sort of contradict anything or duplicate anything. And I did say something. I said, they don't kill you off, do they? She said, no. She said, I wouldn't let them kill me off. And I remember there was a speech which referenced the Loch Ness Monster. And I remember she mentioned that to me. She said, oh, we do mention the Loch Ness Monster. So I don't know if we changed that or not, but as a result of that. But yeah, I didn't try and sort of get too much information out of her. And but I always remember thinking, I thought, gosh, I guess I half wouldn't have been totally surprised if, given that she suddenly was back on television doing that, her attitude to the audios might have changed, that they would become sort of less important. But it didn't really. And she seemed to sort of treat them with equal importance almost, which was great, really, from our point of view. She didn't seem to differentiate, which was lovely.
She was probably able to have more say on the audio scripts than the television scripts. Maybe that's...
I would have thought so. I mean, I'm sure she gave her opinion about the TV script, or certainly would have done if she wasn't happy about it. But yeah, I think she felt it was handled quite well in terms of the character.
Courtesy of Big Finish magazine, Sadie Miller and Jeremy James.
I think it can only be described as a logical progression. There's no major character changes, really, just older and...
Well, it seems like they've been out of the game for a while, doesn't it? Well, I don't think they've seen each other for a long time, had they? She's been off doing her archaeological stuff.
Yeah, doing forensic pathology, so obviously she must have done that quite soon after the first one, if she's going to have studied at all.
Yeah, she's obviously found a way to sort of get out there into the world rather than just being a brain in front of a computer.
Yeah, and there's a lot less emphasis on Nat just being the one regurgitating all the information, which is nice.
Josh has always been independent. through necessity. Whereas you've gone out there and you're sort of doing your own thing. You're not kind of going, oh, there's no wheelchairs in the internet or this kind of thing. Yeah?
No, I think it's quite easy though to slip back into.
I agree.
Yeah, I don't think that they were pitched very far from who we are as people anyway.
Well, I was actually going to talk about the amazing cast that you had in this season. So it's people like Tom Chadbourne. Is there any memories you had working with Tom or even Stephen Greif, Jacqueline Pearce?
All of the above. Tom Chadbourne, right. So I had a bromance with Tom Chadbourne. We hit it off straight away. And I don't quite know what it was about his and my dynamic that suddenly became like I'd known him for years, but we had this weird, brilliant, lovely, but sort of very sudden friendship that just came from nowhere. And I was working backstage at Queen's Theatre for a little bit at the time, and I remember he used to drop in and if he was passing or going on the way to a casting, he'd just pop in the stage door and say, "I can just let Jez know that Tom came by to say hi." And we were in touch on email for a while, and it just after a few years it just goes, sadly. I think he ended up doing a cameo in Casino Royale with James Bond, I think. But in the actual episode, we're at Loggerheads, and that actually made it even more brilliant. Because we liked each other so much, we could really rip into each other quite viciously. It was what a nice bloke. Really, really good guy. I hope he's all right. I don't know where he is. Yeah, and I remember the guy that worked at the stage door at the Queen's is actually, I've already mentioned him today, Mark Donovan. And he's obviously another voice actor. And he was just amazed to see Tom Chadbourne come sort of waltzing in and going, "Hello, is Jez around?" And I wasn't around. I was doing something downstairs, and I came up and Mark said, "Tom Chadbourne, you want to explain this one?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, we made friends. He's a good lad." "Yeah, but he was in City of Death." I went, "Oh, that's right. Yeah." He goes, "It was all I could do to stop myself saying bye, Duggan," as he walked off. I was like, "I don't know what you mean." But then I watched the episode, and it became obvious he was making a funny joke. But yeah, Tom Chadbourne, absolutely legend. Steve Greif, who I'd actually known not just from Travis, but he played this part in Linda LaPlante's comics, and I was completely obsessed with that series. And he was the kind of evil overlord and mercantile crime, and he was so brilliant and sinister in it. Then when he walked through the door, I went, "Hey!" And then, but then we got talking about Peter Wingard. Actually, this is the through line to the interviews. Peter Wingard, and he said, "Oh, no. He's because everyone said he was dead, and Gary Russell said, I think Peter Wingard died a few years ago." I was like, "Oh, that's boring. What?" And then Steve Greif goes, No. I'll dig out his address for you if you like. And he gave me his address. So I ended up posting him a card through his door. But he was very nice. And then he actually auditioned for Judge Dredd as Judge Dredd. And he came in dressed as Clint Eastwood. It was very funny. But that role obviously ended up going to Toby. He was obviously brilliant. And Jacqueline Pearce, wow. Oof. Crikey. What she was so naughty, really naughty, but in a much more kind of sexy way than Colin Baker was naughty. Colin Baker wasn't sexy with being naughty, you see. That's the important distinction. Whereas Jacqueline Pearce was just hilarious and smutty and but absolutely delicious. And what a character. Like, she just charismatic doesn't really cover it. And she was brilliant in the and her and Liz had a really nice time together as well. Yeah. I mean, I was really lucky. I got to spend some time with some really, really tremendous actors with wonderful stories to tell and brilliant characters, and I was just lapping it up, really, just sort of drinking it all down and thinking what a lucky lad I was to be part of it already. And that's that's broadly how I feel about the whole situation now.
Do you remember noticing any difference between John Ainsworth's style of running the show and Gary's?
Yeah, probably. Well, they're two very different blokes. I mean, they're not chalk and cheese by any stretch of the imagination, but what's the difference between John and Gary? I mean, thing is, I got on really well with both of them, so I didn't know. I think you'd have had to have come at it from not knowing either of them, and because I spent quite a lot of time with both of them in different circumstances, I kind of didn't really notice the difference. I know there is one, but it's hard to describe what it is. Gary's actually, there is probably something. Gary's very hands-on. That doesn't mean John is laissez-faire, but Gary's very involved, and he takes ownership. There's the difference. Gary Russell is much more of an owner, and John Ainsworth is much more of a facilitator, and both very, very good to have, just totally different styles. There you go.
So working with an ensemble cast a lot in the last season. So was it recorded 4 days straight? Because I believe the first season was, some was a month later after they'd filmed other ones. Was this done much more as a piece?
I remember it was a lot more intense. So I think we did it in the space of a week, yeah. Whereas the other one was like 2 days here, 2 days there over the course. No, I don't think it stretched over months. I think it was over the course of 3 or 4 weeks. And then I think we did 2 days on each episode. So yeah, so 10 days in a month. But I'm pretty sure that season 2, I mean, maybe I'm wrong. I remember it being intense. So I think it must have been 4 or 5. I think we did 5 days, actually. I think we did a Monday to Friday because then you need the extra day for pickups and ensemble noises and stuff like that. I think we did it over 5 days.
The website says the first 2 were recorded on 2 days, one after the other. And then the second 2 that was the early November, and then late November 2005. Okay. The second 2 were done 2 days after in a 2-day session.
Okay, so we did 2 and 2. Okay, makes sense. Yeah, I don't remember last night, yeah, no, I mean it was. I just remember the maybe it was just because a lot of it was crammed in. Maybe I'm just remembering the last 2 days because I remember going, whoa, that was being completely super tired after the end of it and just kind of almost falling asleep in my chair in the pub afterwards. Just remembering that it was visceral and I'd expended quite a lot of energy. I think I actually pulled a muscle at one point, just kind of exuding kind of some crazy sort of desire to make my emotion as visible, audible rather, as possible. I've done that a few times. I've pulled muscles like dying in, being crushed to death by whoever, and I've kind of strangled myself, and people are looking in the booth going, what's he doing? Has he thought of acting? Yeah, it was very intense. I remember that.
All right, so we've reached the final story in this series, Dreamland, once again written by David Bishop, and here is the blurb. Sarah Jane Smith is still dealing with the tragic consequences of recent events when she is offered the chance of a lifetime, a place on the world's first tourist flight into space. The trip sponsor, Sir Donald Wakefield, believes it is her destiny. But after her recent experiences, what does Sarah still believe in?
Here are the headlines at midday. The world's first space tourism flight has been cleared for liftoff next month. Meanwhile, astronomers have been surprised by the discovery of a previously unrecorded comet approaching the Earth.
It's as if my past is coming back to haunt me. A few careless words at the wrong time, and now...
Since leaving UNIT, it seems that you've been looking for one last great adventure.
I don't know what you're talking about.
I can see it in your eyes, Sarah. The quiet terror you keep buried. Deep down, you suspect you've been chosen for something special, that you still have a destiny to fulfill, and that terrifies you. Come with me on the Dauntless. Confront your destiny and see this through to the finish.
I used to travel with this extraordinary friend. deep down, I've always wondered if he left me here for a reason. But I never knew what it was. Maybe this is it now.
And maybe it isn't.
But I need to have something to hope for again. Something to believe in.
Mission Control to Valiant, you're looking good. Looking good. Valiant has left the ground.
Congratulations! You're on your way into space.
This is Mission Control. The Dauntless has begun its maiden voyage.
Ignition plus 10 seconds. Dauntless is accelerating. Plus 15 seconds. Speed passing 1,000 miles an hour.
Sarah, can you hear me? Josh!
Plus 20 seconds. We're 16 miles above the Earth.
I can hear you, Matt!
Sarah, you spent your whole life fighting injustice. You're a crusader.
My crusading days are over.
Dreamland, the facts and the trivia. Number 2.4 in the Sarah Jane Smith range, the story code was SJ09. Written by David Bishop, directed and produced by John Ainsworth. Starring Elizabeth Sladen and Jeremy James, and Sadie Miller with Stephen Greif. Recorded 24th of November 2005 and released April 2006. Music, theme and sound design by Stephen Foxton. Recorded at Moat Studios. The idea to focus on space tourism came from Elizabeth Sladen herself, and very predictive of what will be coming today. The lead lady actually had more say in these scripts than any previous lead that the writer or producer had worked with. The cliffhanger ending was huge. At the time, there were no plans for a third series, and the writer had no plans for how it would be resolved. A year after recording these episodes, Elizabeth Sladen would bring Sarah Jane Smith back to television in the Sarah Jane Smith Adventures, and for 5 years, until her death, she would be loved by a whole new generation. But also, it made it impossible for her to get back to Big Finish to record more Sarah Jane Smith adventures.
So yeah, you mentioned the cliffhanger, Philip, and that was the huge moment in this one. I've got to say, at the time, I was hoping for a third series. And I remember them saying there wasn't any plans for a third series, and I didn't like it. I remember not liking it.
I don't like it. Yeah, I'm really not quite sure why you would do a cliffhanger like they did with no plans for a third series. And as I said, I was amused by the fact that David Bishop had no idea how to get out of it. But that being said, we had a huge cliffhanger at the end of season 1, and within a couple of lines, it was, they're dead, it's all over. So, she's back on Earth and it's all fine. Anyhow, it's interesting. But yeah, that cliffhanger is sort of why it sticks in the memory. And I guess it's a bit like the Blake 7 ending of the series. When you have a really powerful ending, it often makes the series live on all the better. Of course, this story has a lot more than just a huge cliffhanger. It again has so many character pieces and characters learning to deal with each other, trust each other, and some revelations about relations and who's connected to who and in what ways. So it does explore grief a bit, it explores death a bit, it explores character. There's a lot happening again with this backdrop of this going to space. And I guess, Sarah Jane Smith back in space, lovely place for her to be. What other thoughts do you have about this?
I think the star of this story for me was the character of Josh. And it was almost like, it was a bit of a redemption story for him. He was trying very hard because even though he was put in the position, as we find out through the story, to sort of keep an eye on Sarah Jane, he had a genuine attachment and fondness for her. So the happy, jolly, Jez Fielder-like character of Josh Townsend that we had at the start of Series 1 was now something much, much deeper. He was the same person, but he had much more depth, and he was trying to... Yeah, I think he was trying to redeem himself in Sarah Jane's eyes. He wanted her approval, and that's what he was trying to do in this story.
Yeah, I think the character arc of Jez, as I said, is just... So Joshua, played by Jez, is amazing. And I think the acting ability of Jez really comes out in these stories. So, interesting, as you said, we've interviewed him before too. No real formal acting training, but you can really see he has a lot of ability, and... during the course of these 9 stories, a very, very competent, skilled actor, and you really believe in him. And I think because we love Sarah Jane Smith so much, we want her and him to be reconciled by the end. And once again, the cliffhanger plays into all that as well.
Yeah. So, and we have the big reveal of, as you said, of the relationship between Stephen Greif's character and Jez Fielder's character. So that's always interesting as well. When I say there was a big arc through, you're right. I'm just thinking about what you said before, how this is quite a standalone story, this one. So, yeah, but you cannot listen to any of these and know what's going on really, apart from the first one, without needing to know what happened previously. So, Thank you, John Ainsworth, for putting on the previouslys. John, senior producer now. Come on, you can do that more with the box sets.
At least between box sets.
Yeah, that's right. All right, let's go back to David Bishop and hear his thoughts.
So this is the before selfies. So did you get any photos with Jacqueline and the others?
No, I've got one photo which is Liz and Tom and Jacqueline in the studio. So I had one photo, and then the rest of the time they were busy working because Big Finish does not muck around. They go like the clappers, it has to be said. I mean, they do an amazing lunch. But when they're recording, they don't muck about. There's not a lot of flab in the day, it has to be said. It's very fast moving. And because Liz has the bulk was in almost every scene, as a consequence, she's almost always in the booth, got the cans on and working. So there weren't a lot of breaks in traffic to take photos, unfortunately. I can't remember. I think they were still recording in Brixton at that point, in a fairly rundown part of South London. That was before they moved to the slightly more salubrious studios that Big Finish are in now. So I haven't got a selfie. I've got one photo of the three of them stood there clutching their scripts with a mic boom, and that's it. So yeah, sadly, no mobile phone, no selfie. It did crack me up when I went to the recordings, particularly for Test of Nerve, because with Sadie there, and she was playing the part of Nat. Because the first time I met Liz Sladen, I think it was at a Doctor Who convention. I think it was in Manchester, is my memory of it, maybe a Monopticon. And I was actually interviewing her on stage, and Sadie was there. So, oh God, this is the early 1990s, I guess it must have been. And Sadie can't have been much more than 7 or 8 at the time. And she was wearing a replica Andy Pandy outfit from Hand of Fear. And she was there and was sat in the front row and came up, and it was like an entire convention of everybody's heart breaking, going, oh, she's wearing the dungarees and the whole bit with the candy stripe. So it was very odd to then meet her at least 10 years later, and there she is recording and playing the part of Nat in Test of Nerve. So yes, I can't remember if I reminded her of that or not, but that was a weird sort of life going in full circle moment.
Well, the first time I met Liz Sladen was at an Australian convention, and Sadie also came out with her, and she would have been about 7 or 8 at the same time. So yes, I remember Sadie as being a young child, but I haven't mentioned it to her. I was a bit of a young child then too. Bit older.
Well, I think the first proper Doctor Who thing I went to was Whovention in Sydney in January 1990, and they had Katie Manning and Nicholas Courtney.
Right.
I was at that one.
Yeah.
In the sort of lecture theatre.
Yeah.
And
was that Sydney Uni?
Yeah,
it was.
Yeah. Yes, and Katie perched on Nick's knee for question and answers.
I was there as well.
I was in the front row for that one.
I was in the back.
There you go.
What were you doing in Australia then?
I was on my way. I was emigrating to the UK. So I came over and stopped with. I had relatives who lived in Sydney and outskirts of Sydney, and then I arranged it to go to Whovention on my way. So yeah,
we all book our holidays around Doctor Who events, don't we?
Oh yes. My one regret about Snowblind is we needed one more cast member, because it was kind of obvious for me, it was slightly obvious who the bad guy was, because we needed one more person to keep the mystery going a bit longer. It always frustrated me because the budget was so tight. So we had a very strict number of guest actors that you're allowed to have a story, because the budget for the actors was so tight. So as a consequence, you had to make do with what you had. And me writing oh my God, who done it? Who's the evil person mystery was slightly problematic if you don't have enough, red herrings, people available to be red herrings. So that was a slight frustration, but I did like it a lot, and Tom Chapman was great in it.
I guess Nick Briggs was great at that too.
He was actually, yeah. No, he plays that part really well, and because we sort of think Nick is mostly like voices of Daleks and Cybermen and all the other things, and it's nice when he gets a chance to play a character where there is no ring modulator involved, and he just gets to do some acting, if not himself, you know what I mean. He gets to play a human character and just their own emotions. So I thought, no, he was great in there. And then the Fatal Consequences, and that's the one it's the Marburg virus, I think, from memory. So I did a lot of research into viruses. Never thought that would come in handy later in life. And pandemics and the threats of pandemic and what would happen if you weaponized a virus. I was like, every time I write
none of that would ever happen.
I was always worried. It was going to end up start coming true any moment now. So yeah, absolutely. Because all of them had some element of, they were all based on actual things that had occurred. So Snowblind, they had somebody had gone a bit crazy and started killing people in the Antarctic, and they had to send the FBI down to sort it out. Even though I know they did that in an episode of the X-Files, and it actually also happened in real life. So
I'm sure there's no chance of there ever being a global pandemic.
No, that'll never catch on.
That could never happen.
No, please, no. That's never. And then Dreamland, of course, with that enormous cliffhanger. It was always the plan to end on a cliffhanger, to the frustration of quite a few people who enjoyed the story and were really, trying to figure out where it's going to go. But it was always planned to be a cliffhanger. And then School Reunion came along, and then that led to the Sarah Jane Adventures, and of course there were no more audio dramas, which was a shame. But we always planned to end on a cliffhanger, and I know John had no plans to come back and do another series. So between the two of us, we're just like, we're just going to paint. Whoever takes the baton next, we're going to paint them into an enormous corner and then run away and leave them to try and sort it out. So yeah, evil laugh at that point.
In Australia, we had a TV series called Return to Eden, which was originally a mini-series, then was turned into a soap opera, like Dynasty, very glamorous, very rich, and 24 episodes, the most ridiculous plot lines, the most ridiculous cliffhangers every week. And it didn't really take off in Australia, and they axed it after the first season with this huge, huge season cliffhanger. But they started showing it in Indonesia and around Asia, and was getting 50, 60, 70 million people tuning in to this utterly ridiculous Australian soap opera. And so when it came to the end of the season, because it had this huge cliffhanger, they went, well, what do? We have to wrap it up somehow. And they brought back 3 of the main cast for 10 minutes. And in 10 minutes, they managed to wrap up every bit of the last couple of episodes through a conversation in jail, out of jail, someone being arrested, and ended the whole show. And so it's still, I mean, can I say, I adored this show. It was so over the top camp and ridiculous. But yeah, so they actually, yeah. I keep thinking you just need to do that somehow, get a 5-minute resolution to finish it off. But that being said, this is not the only Big Finish series that ends on a cliffhanger and just ends.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely not. There are endings that we could have done and pulled it together, but I kind of like the idea of just Sarah floating north, and we're not quite sure what's going to happen. Also, in the full and frank knowledge that she was going to be on TV, so therefore the character does live on in School Reunion. We didn't know about the Sarah Jane Adventures at that point, but I mean, we now get, because Sadie's playing Sarah now, isn't she, in the audios? Is that right? Am I just imagining that?
Doing an amazing job.
Yeah, so,
and she really sounds like a mother. She's really got the intonations right now and nailing that part.
Yeah, I mean, I was lucky. A couple of years ago, I got to write an audio original for the BBC audio range, a Second Doctor audio original with Fraser Hines, as the reader, as the narrator playing Jamie. But of course, he does the most incredible Patrick Troughton. I mean, it's like Patrick Troughton is right there. It's uncanny how close the voice is. And that was wonderful. So yeah, no, I must search out some of the new ones with Sadie, and I'd like to hear what she's doing now. So
listen, David, once again, thank you so much for your recollections. You've had amazing depth and understanding to these stories, and made me enjoy them all the more.
Oh, you're very welcome. A trip down memory lane is always a pleasure.
Courtesy of Big Finish magazine, Stephen Greif.
Well, Sir Donald is a kind of one of these very big self-made men like Robert Maxwell. He's a sort of Robert Maxwell type. Came from nothing, went into corporate business, into the city, and became a billionaire by the time he was 28 or something. It's his dream to be on this flight. He wants to be the first man to do it, and he's paid lots of money to do it, and nothing's going to get in his way. He's that kind of ruthless guy. He's got like all of these guys, he's got soft spots, but not many people see it. Well, Johnny Ainsworth approached me because I've worked with him before. He interviewed me a couple of times with Jackie Pierce for Blake 7 conventions. Very good to work with. And I've worked with Big Finish on quite a number of occasions as well. Judge Dredd and other Doctor Who's. Tom Chadburn, who I worked with yesterday on an episode. Tommy and I were at RADA together. So it was a thrill to see him, an old dear friend. And we're going to meet up again soon, have some lunch, chew the fat. Got a few years to catch up on. So I know Tommy and, of course, Jackie Pierce.
Now, the ending of this series, I still remember how I felt at the end, and it's one of those... Let me put it this way. Was there any consideration to a third season?
We wanted to leave it in such a way that there could be a third season. But
surely there had to be a third season. You can't have possibly meant to leave it the way you did.
Well, I think I wanted to leave it. If it did end there, I almost wanted there to be an end. I mean, we couldn't kill her off, and didn't want to kill her off, but wanted to leave it slightly ambiguously. You said I'm not to give away spoilers. So.
Well, I mean, I think we can clearly say there's a huge cliffhanger at the end of the season, and it doesn't resolve. No. I mean, I'm assuming there must have been plans for a third season. You must have known there must have been plans for how you're going to resolve it.
Well, there was plans in the no. I mean, because if there had been a third season, I think I decided I wasn't going to do it. I don't know why I thought that. It wasn't. I mean, I'd certainly enjoyed working with Liz. I think I just wanted to do something else different, and it had taken up a lot of sort of time and blah, blah, blah.
So basically you're just an evil monster who wanted to leave an unbelievably difficult cliffhanger for someone else to deal with. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, sort of. Yes. I mean, I think I might have suspected that there wouldn't be a third season. I think later on I did perhaps regret the way we'd done it, because there were a few other Big Finish series around that time that also ended on cliffhangers. I can't think what they were, though. But I remember it being a criticism being levelled at us at the time.
Gallifrey used to end with big cliffhangers.
But I think there was other ones that weren't resolved or something. I can't remember what it was.
Tomorrow People may have been one of them, actually.
Possibly.
And Jacob Lightfoot ended up doing off as well for tragic reasons.
Maybe. That would have been later. But anyway, I think I may have slightly thought, maybe we shouldn't have done that. I think we just wanted to end it dramatically.
I was going to say, you say that you shouldn't have done it, but it does make for extremely compelling listening. It's really good stuff.
Yeah. There's a lot of shouting, isn't there, at the end?
It's like how they finished Blake 7. When you finish a show in such a dramatic way, you won't forget it. You may not like it, but you won't forget it.
No. Yeah, exactly. And, I mean, I suppose now, I sort of think it's still... I do quite like it. I mean, yes, there's sort of questions about what has happened. But in amongst it, there is still... it's still sort of hopeful in a way. I mean, because I think Sarah says, she's like, I didn't think I'd ever see that again or something like that. I think we wanted to suggest possibly that it was like she'd see the TARDIS had appeared or something like that, or I don't know. Something had happened that she knew about that we didn't, and it was possibly a good thing.
Okay, so I was thinking like some creatures that she'd met so some Doctor Who story that she'd had dealings with had arrived, ice warriors or something was what I was taking, and also because they're heading into the comet and Mandragora and all those things were connected too. So yeah, there's so many possibilities.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and I thought that was good.
We need a short trip, don't we, to end it?
Not everything has to be tied up.
You want a bridge between that and the Sarah Jane Adventures. The Sarah Jane Adventures is there, so we know something happened between that and that. So we have to be satisfied with that.
We could say our audios happen after Sarah Jane Adventures, for what we know. It's not conclusive, is it, that they don't? I mean, I'm not sure. I think it's a little bit of an awkward existence for them to exist side by side, but
no, it's fine. So, what in terms of just the whole series, then, what are you most happy with? What are you glad about?
Well, my personal memory is working with Liz, and that was just brilliant, and that was such a fond memory. And I think we made it. It was a follow-on from the first series, but it was its own thing as well. It's quite different in many ways. I loved getting Sean Lay in to do the news report stuff, and that's how it ends, isn't it? The last thing we hear is one of those news reports, and because I don't even know, Sean Lay is a newsreader on the BBC. I knew him from a long time ago when he'd done audiovisual stuff. So I said, would you mind playing a newsreader? And he came in to do that, and he recorded all his stuff in one go. Met Liz very briefly. And I love that way it ends on the news report. You just have this quite sort of level, calm, matter of fact, we've lost contact sort of thing, isn't it? And,
but I mean, the whole radio broadcast was a bit Russell T Davies. He often used news to get a lot of exposition done quickly. And that was one of the really effective things that was used. It was one of those framing devices that you used, that the writer was using throughout, David was using throughout, as well as I talked about the previous and next. He also used that as a framing device. Those radio broadcasts, which I think he'd also done, or at least it had been done previously in the first season as well, but worked really effective to give it a lot of exposition, but also set the framework. So in the first radio broadcast, I went back and listened to it again after I listened to the four of them. Of course, everything that's going to happen in the next four stories is mentioned in that news report. So there's clues being given away to missing scientists here and people going there and a protest happening here. And so all the four stories are all being self-referenced in those news reports, even though we haven't got to that story yet.
Yes, that's right.
So it's just a very clever way of preempting the action that's going to come.
Yeah, and it sort of helps bind them all together a bit, I think. So, I was very pleased with that. I don't know if David came up with that entirely on his own or I suggested it. I can't remember. But I was pleased about that. And it's the only series for Big Finish I've done where we actually had a separate photo shoot for the covers, which seems like a luxury thing to do. Because normally we're just using old photos of the characters from TV shows and everything, but for this I booked a photo studio. Lee Binding came along and who was doing the covers, and he sort of directed it. He'd sort of decided what he wanted to do for each of the covers, and we just got Liz to stand in appropriate poses, holding a pencil, which became a torch, and on the first cover and everything.
Were they all her outfits?
Yeah, there was all her own clothes, and I think apart from the parka, we got from that she wears on the front of the Snowbound one. And I remember getting slightly annoyed about that. I thought, we should have made her wear a scarf because you can just see she's wearing a t-shirt underneath. And I think, I don't know, you'd wrap up a bit more warm in the Arctic if you were doing. And I think we made sure at least in one of them she has the little airplane badge because that's visible in most of the covers of the first series, I think. And that sort of became a thing, really. So she made sure she had that. So that was good. It was nice to be able to have sort of proper, specially shot covers. And
she just gotta say, she never aged, did she? Like, just looking stunning. Because you look at those photos and think, oh no, they must have been, decades old. But yeah, it's just amazing how she always looks so good.
Yeah, no, she was amazing.
Now you also had a specially created theme song as well for.
Yes, it was different for the second series, wasn't it?
It was,
yes,
because you had a new. Steve Foxton did the music and sound design for this series, so he did his own theme song. Was that something you'd requested?
Yes, definitely. I think I wanted it to reflect that whole sort of prophecy mystery thing, to have a sort of sense of that. Yeah,
and once again, just excellent sound design by Steve Foxton. He did an amazing job.
Yeah, Steve was. Did he do all of them? Did he do sound design on all of them?
I think he did.
See, again, I'd worked with Steve a lot on Judge Dredd, and had a high regard for his abilities to do sound design and music. I remember at the end of it all, I think after that photo shoot, which I think was the last thing we did, we'd recorded everything, and I remember Liz saying, right, and it was, for some reason everyone else just disappeared, and it was just Liz and me, and she said, let's go and have a drink. She said, I'll buy you a gin and tonic, she said, or something like that. And we just sat down in this hotel barn near where the photo studio was, and just sort of chatted about it, really. And yeah, that was like sort of almost like that was our little private rap party in a way, because it had felt like a long journey because we had been talking about it all for so long, and I think we were pleased with what we'd done, really, which was nice. And we kept, even though we didn't do a third season, I kept in touch with Liz. I did a few interviews with her for Doctor Who magazine and stuff, and so we would talk on the phone, or I'd see her at a convention or something. And I think the last time I saw her was at the launch for the final season of the Sarah Jane Adventures, and that was that. I mean, that was only a few months before she passed away, unfortunately. But, yeah.
Do you know she was sick?
No. I think she'd kept that very, very quiet. Yeah, so it came as a bit of a surprise, I think. A bit of a shock.
By the time we recorded the second season, Liz had already filmed the TV episode she was going to be in, even though it wouldn't appear till much later. Were you aware that she? Yeah.
No, I wasn't aware.
Right.
No, and I suspect she was under a strict NDA as well.
Probably. So was there ever any talk of a third season?
Very briefly, I had a conversation with Liz, and I had a conversation with John, and both conversations were the same, which was, did you notice that it was left slightly open? And I said, well, I mean, it would be a bit of a stretch, but yeah, I can see, okay, I mean, maybe, but so I think that there was I think the desire was to make sure there was a possibility for a third. But I suspect now, and particularly now that she'd filmed the school reunion stuff. Was it the school reunion stuff or the Sarah Jane Adventures? It was the school reunion. That came first, and everyone loved her, obviously, and then went, well, give her own series because she's great. I suspect that became much more of a preoccupation and much more interesting for her in terms of a project. And I think probably the third. I think there might have been a long way down the line, kind of nowish. Maybe they could have thought about bringing it back, but from what the decisions were in terms of the end, I'm not going to do spoilers unless you do spoilers. But yeah. But I mean, I won't do it as a matter of course. It looked to me, reading it for the first time and kind of then going back over the ending, going, what has happened here? Is there longevity in this? And I thought, no, not really. I think it looked as though they pretty much closed it off. Yeah.
Right. You didn't feel they needed to contact you, and you didn't contact Russell T Davies and say, where's my part in the Sarah Jane Adventures? I'm Sarah Jane's companion. I need to be here.
Do you know what? But if these things do actually occur, I would be lying if I said that I looked at this Sarah Jane Adventures and went, well, that's a bit mean, isn't it? I mean, all this work, I can't understand why they don't want a sort of slightly craggy, long-haired bloke in this series with a load of teenagers. Yeah, maybe probably not right for it. Yeah, I mean, you always think, oh my God, Sarah, they're interchangeable. Liz is doing that. She'll probably get me and Sadie in that. She'll probably do that. And you think, well, you never know. I might, get cast as something. No, there's never. It's just totally unrealistic. It's a completely different project, completely separate. And it wasn't like I was fuming for days. I just was like, well, that would have been nice. But then you watch it and you think, there's no place for me here.
How did you hear when Liz passed? Did you know she was sick?
No, I didn't know she was sick. No, it was who is it that I spoke to? I think it was Nick and Gary. But you know what? I found it on Twitter. Twitter gave me the heads up. As this isn't going to age well, is it? But Twitter was the thing. And then I probably called Nick. Me and Nick are really good mates. And then he was like, "Oh yeah, no, we didn't. I'm so sorry. We should have said something." And yeah, I had absolutely no idea about it at all. I was just really, and it was really, really sad, because suddenly what happens is you go back to, you immediately, all your images are flooded with all the fun that you had, and this sort of vibrant woman, this sort of beautiful, vibrant, very good sport, but also serious lady who you spent quite a lot of time with, and you sort of became incredibly familiar with and very friendly with, it's not like, me and Liz we used to go to the pub all the time, and she would always, she'd buy me a Man United top for Christmas, and, we'd kind of bump into each other at things. And then, when we got into the studio, it was like, oh, here we go. This is great. We know where we are with each other. This is going to be a piece of cake. And we bounced off each other. Like, honestly, it was an unexpected, but really good partnership. I think that the guys at Big Finish did a good job. I think it was a dynamic that they thought was worth the risk, and I think it turned out to be pretty good. But yeah, when I found out about that, I just was just so sad. And then I think I posted a picture of me and Liz on Facebook and just said, I've just found out, and this is terribly sad. And lots of people came, oh no, this is, this kind of outpouring of sadness. And it was, it affected me. It did. I just, when things happen like that, when there is such a sort of horrible surprise, and you just think, where did it come from? But it makes sense that, from what I know of Liz, that she would have not said anything. She'd have just tried to make the best of it. And yeah, it's a real show. It's horrible, but it's really nice that Sadie's reprising Sarah for Big Finish now. I think that's a beautiful tribute, and she's the only person that can do it.
Sounding more and more like her too. It's just extraordinary how well they sound.
They do sound, but they sounded similar on the Sarah Janes. I mean, now that Sadie's, I'm not saying Sadie's voice has dropped, but you know what I mean.
It has. She's older.
She's a bit older now. And there's a similarity of cadence actually, and there's and the accent. She's got a very nicely spoken English accent, and that's the same. It's like they got, phonetically, you'd look at an analysis of it and you'd be like, this is the same person. So yeah, I think it's a brilliant tribute, and incredibly well executed as well. Yeah, yes. When I heard that, I was delighted.
Well, Philip, it's been a pleasure revisiting these stories again, and it's been lovely to chat with some of the people involved behind the scenes and in front of the mic, as always. And Jez Fielder, lovely guy, and thanks to John Ainsworth and David Bishop for all the time that they gave us to really give this a good, thorough revisit.
Yeah, it's interesting. Our first retrospective for the first season of Sarah Jane has become one of our most popularly downloaded episodes, which means there must have been an awful lot of love out there, both for Sarah Jane and that And hopefully, as many people, if not more, listen to this and go back and find the first one. Because, just understanding what Elizabeth Sladen did, recognizing these two amazing series. It'd be lovely to have had more, but they're a very special place and they do a lot of special things. And very, very excited to revisit them. And I've so thoroughly enjoyed listening to these 9 stories again.
Just on a related note, Big Finish have recently released something related to Sarah Jane Smith, or at least the Sarah Jane Smith adventures. So Rani takes on the world. And it's interesting, I was looking at some of your tweets saying how good they were, so I thought I'll have a listen to it. And it's been nice to revisit. Like it's not the same world that was portrayed in the Sarah Jane Smith audio series, but it's nice to be able to go back and get sort of that attachment to Sarah Jane Smith, the character, who is still, decades and decades later, still adored by fans old and new.
Yeah, well, it's interesting how the Doctor looms over all these stories. Sarah occasionally refers to him going back to space. So the Doctor's not in any of these stories, but his presence looms over Sarah Jane Smith's life. And so it's interesting with that new Rani box set, where Sarah Jane looms over Rani and Clyde. And so it's no longer the Doctor; it's now Sarah Jane, and so she has that that air over what's going on, which is really nice.
It's a constant presence.
It is. So really enjoyed that first 3 box set. Really looking forward to the next 3 in December. I think the second box set of Rani gets released, and the legacy goes on.
Absolutely. All right, it's been a pleasure to be able to do this with you, Philip. So thank you once again for doing this with me.
My pleasure, and thank you for letting me cause so much hassle for your editing skills.
It's what you do best, Philip.
Oh, I know.
We'll catch you all next time.
Bye, everyone.
This has been the Sirens of Audio, episode 158, Sarah Jane Smith, Series 2, A Retrospective, with your hosts Philip Edney and Dwayne Bunny. With thanks to our guests John Ainsworth, David Bishop, Jez Fielder and Gary Russell. Music by Steve Foxon. Sarah Jane Smith is available to purchase from bigfinish.com. Our website is sirensofaudio.com. Comment below to let us know what you thought of the episode, or contact us via email at sirensofaudio@gmail.com or via any one of our socials. Thanks for listening, audiophiles. We'll hear you next time.